Welcome to the World Prosperity Forum, Day 5, the fifth and final day here from Zurich, Switzerland, just up the road from the World Economic Forum, which has been much in the news this week. But here at the World Prosperity Forum, we are presenting the freedom-based, prosperity-focused alternative to the World Economic Forum. In Davos all week long, titans of industry, leaders of NGOs, politicians from around the world have been presenting their vision, a top-down vision, one in which the bureaucratic elites, you can see your example, for example, in Brussels for the European Union, would be running our world, running our individual nations to the extent they're permitted to still exist. And the results so far have been catastrophic. But there's hope. We don't all have to submit to that. And here at the World Prosperity Forum, we have been presenting that alternate vision all week, and we have our fifth and final day today in which we will be doing the same. So for our first presentation, I would like to talk about energy, because while we're talking about prosperity, we have to talk about energy. Energy, the cost of energy, the availability of energy is built into the price of every good and service bought, sold, and traded in our economies. When the price of energy goes up, for example, if there are refrigerators that are being shipped from Dallas to Chicago, the price of gasoline is a big factor. For a manufacturing plant, the price of electricity or on-site power production. All of these factors dictate how strongly our economy is going to perform and what our standards of living are going to be. And of course, that's just production for business, industry, and the overall economic health. When you pay higher gasoline prices, that comes directly out of your pocket. When you pay higher electricity prices, again, it comes directly out of your pocket and takes away money that you would otherwise have available for nutritious food, for quality housing, for better education, for parks and recreation. It's not just money for the sake of money. When we pay more money for electricity, we are reducing our standard of living and our quality of life. So energy, freedom, and prosperity, the reason why it's so important right now, let's go to the first slide there, Jim, if you're not already there. There are several critical challenges facing the grid. Actually, the grid is in its most imperiled state, probably since it was ever created. What we see right now, we see affordability being a big issue. Prices are rising, and we'll get into the exact numbers in just a moment. At the same time, reliability. Demand is growing. There's been a rapid increase in blackouts, and it's projected to go even higher. There's a reason for this. The reason is that there has been a tremendous increase in demand with AI and big tech data centers. At the same time, we've been moving away from reliable baseload sources like coal, natural gas, nuclear, and toward wind and solar for political reasons. The irony is that while policymakers must be aware that there are consequences for this. See, for example, New Jersey, Virginia, recent elections have shown that the price of electricity, the price of energy has been a huge factor in those races. Ironically, it's politicians who are supporting the more expensive sources, wind and solar, who have taken advantage of that. So hopefully our policymakers will get a better grasp of the true factors involved in this topic. And we at the Heartland Institute hope to give them that information. Next slide. So as I mentioned, electricity demand is growing and will continue to grow, especially with the boom in computing data centers and server farms that's necessary for artificial intelligence and quantum computing. Next slide. How much demand can we expect? Well, according to Grid Strategies report, and this is an entity that this is what they do. They get tuned in on what's happening with electricity, with business data. Here's what they say. The era of flat power demand is behind us. Nationwide electric demand is forecast to increase by 15.8% by 2029. Now let's stop for a moment on that. By 2029, you're talking 4 years, 15% growth. The grid, the electric grid, our national electric grid is a huge, complex system. We're not talking a 15% growth in the demand for milk or 15% growth in sneaker demand. We have to build out the grid to handle 15% more electricity throughout the country. But it gets worse. According to ICF Global Consulting, they forecasted electricity demand is expected to grow by 25% by 2030. So this is a huge challenge. If we can't meet demand, that's when we get brownouts and blackouts. Next slide. And here we see the practical consequences of having not enough power to meet demand. So a US Department of Energy report, the federal government understands this. They released a report about 6 months ago evaluating US grid reliability and security. And what the report finds is if current retirement schedules, by that they mean the political decisions to shut down primarily coal power plants, but also nuclear, natural gas, to replace eventually with wind and solar power that's not baseload power generation. If current retirement schedules and incremental additions remain unchanged, most regions will face unacceptable reliability risks within 5 years, and the nation's electrical power grid will be unable to meet expected demand for AI, data centers, manufacturing, and industrialization while keeping the cost of living low for all Americans. Retirements plus load growth increase risk of power outages 100 times in 2030. Allowing 104 gigawatts of firm generation to retire by 2030 without timely replacement could lead to significant outages when weather conditions do not accommodate wind and solar generation. Modeling shows annual outage hours could increase from single digits today to more than 800 hours per year. That's where you have the 100-fold increase in blackouts. This is a US Department of Energy report. And the key here is this. It's not just that we have to build out somewhere between 15 and 25% additions to the grid, which is an enormous enterprise. But on top of that, if we're shutting down coal power, and that's why the emphasis in this report, if current retirement schedules remain unchanged, we have to build in addition to that to compensate for the coal power plants especially, but also natural gas and nuclear that are being shut down for political purposes. So if we're looking at 25% electricity demand growth by 2030, we actually need to build out about 35% more to the grid if we're going to allow this politically driven shutdown of conventional existing baseload power plants. Next slide, please. There is a political consequence. If you are a policymaker, whether you're a Republican, a Democrat, I don't care. I just want good policy. You can see what has happened when this challenge to the grid and electricity prices has continued unabated. So for example, this is an article from CNBC, November 13th, 2025, just after the midterm elections. Well, not a midterm, but an off-year election. Skyrocketing electricity prices fuel political backlash against tech sector's AI data centers. Political backlash against the tech sector for their electricity demand and for stifling conventional energy production is good. But the timing of this article is not coincidental. It was just a week after the elections where in New Jersey and Virginia, the two highest profile races in the country, affordability and especially energy prices were the key topics in the debate. And because of that, elections were decided. Next slide. And that was acknowledged in the Washington Post here in November 19th, 2025. The headline, electricity bills are soaring and flipping seats. Again, if you're not on the right side of this issue, if you can't show your constituents that you are ahead of the game, there will be and have been consequences to pay, political consequences. With the demand increase that's coming, with the current pace of shutdowns for conventional power sources, if you're a policymaker in office today and you're facing voters in 2028, 2030, 2032, you better be able to say that you saw this coming and did your best to prevent it, or hopefully even fix it in your state or region before the push happens. Next slide. So, how are policymakers, regulators, federal and state, responding to this demand and this oncoming crisis? Well, the wrong solution is to eliminate conventional coal, natural gas power plants, existing baseload power sources, and replace them with wind and solar. The Problem is, despite accelerating electricity demand and a shortage of rare earth minerals that are necessary for wind and solar, utilities are enacting net zero carbon dioxide plans that require the removing of crucial on-demand baseload power and requiring more utilization of rare earth minerals. Next slide. So to what extent are we seeing these eliminations? Well, in 2020, coal power provided 773,000 gigawatt hours of US electricity. In 2024, just 4 years later, that number fell to just 650,000 gigawatt hours. That's a drop of 15% of coal power production in just 4 years. And electricity demand is not dropping. Next slide. Now take a look at what the cost consequences are. From 2020 through 2024, so as we see that drop in coal power generation fell, if we look at the overall electricity mix, from 19% of our electric mix down to 15%. So what made up the difference? From 2020 through 2024, that same time period, US wind and solar power generation grew from 10% to 15% of the national electricity mix. So basically, you've taken 5%, a significant hunk of the power, kicked out coal, put in wind and solar. Next slide. What happens when you do this? What happens when you replace affordable coal power with wind and natural gas? Next slide, please. Well, here's some data. From 2010 to 2020, this 10-year period, US electricity prices rose at less than 1% per year. We were not getting electricity inflation at all. In just a 4-year period, 2020 through 2024, electricity prices rose 22%, more than 5 times faster the pace before then. Next slide, please. So during the past 4 years, American electricity prices have skyrocketed by 22%. In real terms, this has added more than $300 each and every year to average household electricity bills. By the way, that's just the direct electricity bills. Again, higher electricity prices are fueling inflation across the board for all the goods and services that we're purchasing. But just on your electricity bills alone, average household, you're paying an additional $300 each and every year for the same electricity that you had before. Totally unnecessary. Next slide. So why is it that wind and solar are higher priced than coal, nuclear, natural gas? Or really, can we say for sure that's the case? Because oftentimes we hear that wind and solar are already less expensive than coal and fossil fuels, or that soon to be more affordable. Well, let's take a look at the actual data. In a peer-reviewed science publication, and this is the Journal of Energy, peer-reviewed, energy economists examined what they call the levelized full system cost of electricity. The full system accounts for real-world added costs imposed by intermittency. So in other words, let's say the wind is not blowing sufficiently and you have to quickly switch on natural gas. Natural gas is powering the grid. The wind now picks up. Natural gas power plants still have to be running in the background so that when the wind dies down, we still have that power immediately. So that's added cost to the grid when you're having not just the wind generation, but natural gas power plant running in the background, not able to sell power. So intermittency, extended transmission line requirements. We can build a power plant, a conventional power plant, pretty much anywhere we want. So we can place one just outside Denver. We can place one on the outskirts of Chicago or Cleveland. But for wind and solar, it could be that, I won't say they're very good places for wind power generation, but the least bad ones, let's say the Iowa Plains, one of my home states, the West Texas Plains, far away from Houston, Dallas, whatever. It costs a tremendous amount of money to build transmission lines. It can cost in the billions of dollars for that. So you have to factor that in as costs that are attributed to wind and solar. Oftentimes they're not built into the numbers that renewable activists claim. They're just looking at the price of the product itself, not counting in what the costs were necessary that the whole grid had to absorb, no matter what power was generated. So that and other factors, they looked at the full system levelized cost of electricity. And here's what you get, the peer-reviewed data. Next slide, Jim. First of all, this is the best case scenario. They looked at 2 different regions to generate their numbers. So first they looked at, okay, where is an ideal place for wind and solar power generation? Some places are pretty decent for wind power. Some places are pretty decent for solar power. Where do we get them both? And what they came up with was Texas, and especially West Texas. So in what is a largely ideal place for wind and solar production, where their costs would be lower than most places, what they found is that on a dollars per megawatt hour basis, if you power the grid with natural gas, that's going to cost you $40 per megawatt hour. Coal, $90. Biomass, $117. Nuclear, $122. Wind, $291. Solar, $413 per megawatt hour. If you're going to build out your grid with wind power in an ideal place to do so, it's going to cost you 7 times what it would cost to build out a new natural gas power plant. If you're going to build it out with solar, it's going to cost you more than 10 times. Next slide. The next place they looked at for comparative cost was Germany. And Germany is going to be pretty similar to what you see in New Jersey, Michigan, some of the places where wind and solar have been advocated. It's more northerly, tends to be cloudier, not necessarily as windy as the high plains in the American West and plains. The numbers that they discovered and published here: natural gas, $35 per megawatt hour. Coal, $78. Biomass, $103. Nuclear, $105. Wind, $483. Solar, $1,380 per megawatt hour. What you're talking about now is to replace natural gas, conventional power with wind power, you are increasing costs by approximately 14 times what natural gas is. For solar power, it's amazing. It's about 40 times as expensive. This is the reason why electricity prices are so much more expensive where you have more wind and solar power. Next slide. In this chart, you see in a graphic form the cost of power per source in the best place scenario for wind and solar in Texas. Now, sometimes people will say to me, next slide, why can't we have all of the above? I'm for all of the above energy sources. We need it all. We need a lot of energy. We need it all. Well, there's plenty of natural gas, coal, nuclear to go around. But why would I want to make people purchase their electricity from the sources on the bars on the left? They rise sky high when I can have prices that are so low on the right. It reminds me, for example, I love to drink Diet Coke. Wish I didn't, but I do. All right, if I go to, let's say, the hotel where we're hosting the World Prosperity Forum, our conference room here, and I go down to the lobby and I get a Diet Pepsi because they don't have Diet Coke, unfortunately. But nevertheless, I'm paying about $5 per bottle. And there may be a time when I need it if I don't have anything else available. But if I go down to the grocery store just down the street, well, let's say I'll use my my hometown grocery store in Florida because I know what they charge. I can buy a 6-pack of Diet Coke and it comes out to about $1.50 per bottle, much less expensive than I can get in a hotel here or in the States. And sometimes if they're running a special, I might get it for 75 cents a bottle on average, buying a 6-pack. And if I go to Costco, I know I can get as much as I want for 75 cents per bottle. I need Diet Coke. I can tell you I need a lot of Diet Coke. But I can get it from these various sources. I can get as much as I want. I'm not going to say I need all of the above to make sure I have Diet Coke. So I'm going to start buying $5 bottles at the hotel when I can get them for 75 cents elsewhere. It's the same thing with electricity. All of the above makes no sense if you're looking out for consumer prices, affordability, and your constituents' living standards. Next slide, please. So this data that I just presented, much of it is presented in the Heartland Institute policy brief, Affordable, Reliable, and Clean, an objective scorecard to assess competing energy sources. You can find this online. You can just do an internet search for Heartland Institute, Affordable, Reliable, Clean. And here is a print copy that I have with me, but you can download it digitally and get the same information. Next slide. So just in short summary, for Affordable, Reliable, Clean, the policy brief, what we found is that as we rank competing sources for power generation, natural gas is the gold standard as far as affordability. And you saw that in the numbers I presented. Coal is pretty good. Nuclear is pretty good. Hydro is pretty good. Natural gas is the gold standard. There's no reason for affordability reasons to shut down any of these existing power plants. And in fact, if we're looking for new generation, that's what we should be utilizing. Reliability. Can we know with confidence a day from now that we can get a certain amount of power production from a given source? Will we know a week from now, a month from now? Can we plan this out? So we rank reliability factors. Here we have natural gas, coal, and nuclear. Again, they are best. They're baseload power generation. Basically, you can produce as much as you want, when you want, on the schedule that you want. And finally, environmental impact. In other words, the clean component. And some people are surprised, but I'll walk you through it just a little bit. Natural gas is again best, then nuclear, then hydro, then coal. It may sound surprising to some because all we've heard is that the only environmental issue that matters is CO2 emissions, but there's a lot more than that to that than CO2 emissions. Next slide. So here we see, as an example, this is a screenshot from one of the pages of the Affordable, Reliable, Clean study. And we have not just the numbers, but we have green, blue, yellow, orange, red color coding. So at a quick glance, policymakers can see, all right, these are good sources, these are poor sources. Donald Kendall, who's spoken here a little bit during the forum, he is the person who put those graphics together. Fantastic job, Donald. Next slide. Affordable, reliable, clean, reliability. So what we do is, by the way, we rank. We don't just give numerical price data, for example, for affordability on the sources, then we rank them. So natural gas comes in at a 1 because it's the most affordable, all the way up to wind and solar, which get up to 10. So reliability, natural gas, coal, nuclear, they get the good score of a 1. You can count on them whenever you want and produce as much as you want. Biomass gets a 2, which is good. Hydro's a 3, which is pretty good. Wind power and solar power bring up the rear. Now, it's so important to understand that, again, environmental factors are important. I'll get into them in a minute, but you have to have affordability. If you think that's not important, talk to the policymakers in New Jersey and Virginia who lost their jobs. Talk to the American people who demand it to be able to meet their living standards. Reliability is key. If you can't count on the lights turning on when you flip the switch, the political consequences the policymakers have already faced for not keeping electricity affordable is going to be approximately, 10 times, 100 times more, because what's worse than having expensive power is no power at all. So before we get to the environmental clean component, just another couple points to make on reliability. They're very important. Next slide. Huge threat is rare earth shortages. This has been in the news to a good deal lately as President Trump is looking to find and expand production of rare earth minerals here in the United States. And there's a reason that he feels compelled to do so. Most of the rare earth minerals that we use in this world are produced and or refined in China. The problem with that, not only is it just good to have it here in the United States, but China can and does already have a track record of weaponizing their export of rare earth minerals based upon political factors. If we're going to have our entire energy grid, energy production, energy utilization dependent on the goodwill of China, that's a huge reliability concern. So next slide. Here you see a screen grab from a news article, WION News, in July of this past year. And the title is Ford's Plants Now Shut for the Past 3 weeks. Ford CEO develops domestic supply chain. Ford CEO developed domestic supply chain for rare earths. In other words, they were not getting enough rare earths from China. They had to shut down production of Ford auto plants, which is a huge factor in the American economy. We're dependent on foreign sources when we don't need to be. Those rare earth minerals are crucial for wind and solar power production equipment. They're not crucial for coal, natural, nuclear gas. Natural gas, nuclear. But for wind power and solar power, you have to have those rare earths. Next screen. Here's another screenshot. This is Chinese hold on solar power tech raises fresh sabotage fears in Europe. What happened recently is that in Europe and elsewhere in the United States, we have found that Chinese manufactured solar panels, which is pretty much the only place you're going to buy them, were implanted with kill switches, secretly implanted, just discovered, so that China, if they get in a huff with the United States, press the switch. If you're reliant on solar power, the lights don't go on. Economic chaos. Another reason for reliability concerns where we must have domestically produced and affordable natural gas, coal, nuclear, hydro. Next slide. All right, clean. Environmental impact. What we did in this study, is that we looked at the various environmental factors that we want to take into consideration when we're assessing environmental impact. The climate activist lobby has convinced many people that the only environmental factor we should be considering is CO2 emissions. But I remember as I was growing up, what was most important was land conservation. Are we cutting down trees? Are we leveling open spaces? Are we affecting ecosystems? That's still an environmental concern, believe it or not. At least it should be. There are other factors as well. Water pollution, soil pollution, direct species kills. So we took a look at those topics and we gave the score, 0 being best, 10 being worst, on those topics. So starting off with emissions, yes, it is true, wind and solar power, they get a 0. Perfect score as far as emissions. Also, nuclear and hydro get a perfect score. They're emissions-free power sources. Natural gas is a 2, which is a very good score. Much fewer emissions than coal. Coal gets a 7, biomass gets a 7. But now let's look at the next factor, land conservation. What's interesting, well, I'll give you the scores first. Natural gas comes in best at 1, hydro and nuclear 2, coal 4, biomass 4, solar 6, wind 10. So why does wind get a score of 10? Scientists at Harvard University, who, by the way, believe in a climate crisis, who feel that they want to do everything possible to reduce CO2 emissions, they factored out how much wind power would we need to power our grid with wind power so that we can meet the goal that we're looking for. And what they found is we would literally have to place solar panels on 1/3 of America's landmass. We'd have to develop, whether it's open plains, forests, mountaintop ridges, coastal shorelines, 1/3 of our country. Think of the environmental destruction that would entail. Think of the ecosystems that would be destroyed. And by the way, if we mandated electrification of transportation, electric vehicles, like the Biden administration tried to do, that number jumps to 50%. You talk about an environmental hellscape, that is a land where we sacrifice all of our open spaces so we can say we're generating wind and solar. Next panel. So the next factor that we looked at is species kills. And here, once again, natural gas, nuclear, coal score pretty well. It's a power plant. You have a small footprint. It's a very basic process. Solar and wind do quite poorly. So for example, studies based upon actual bird and bat counts show that literally millions of birds and bats are sliced to death in mid-flight each year due to wind turbines. At the same time, you have solar panels, for example, that are largely placed in the desert that take up not quite as much space as wind turbines, but still quite a bit, have been disrupting and causing the elimination of habitat, for example, for protected desert tortoises and other species. When you look at the environmental data on those species kills, again, wind and solar are environmentally devastating. Next slide, water and soil. Here, again, you see solar and wind finishing at the bottom, and you have conventional energy sources doing well. A couple reasons for that. First of all, the mining of rare earth minerals that's so necessary for wind and solar is the most environmentally destructive practice on the planet. They're called rare earth minerals, not because there's very few of them. It's because they don't form in clumps and veins and clusters where you can have a single mine and then produce quite a bit of the rare earth minerals. You have to excavate tremendous amounts of rock, dirt, soil to get a decent amount of rare earths. And once you get them, because they are not clumped together, you must process, usually through hydrological processes, you must process those minerals in order to utilize them. The toxic runoff is absolutely devastating, and a reason why most of this occurs in China, in Africa, in third world countries, where environmental concerns are not as much as they are here in the United States. So water and soil pollution, and we also look at not just the water, but the soil. When you have solar panels, for example, what scientists have found, environmental scientists have found, is that there's a leaching of the toxic elements into the soil. So solar panels have a good deal of toxic minerals, not just the rare earth minerals, which can be very toxic, but many others as well, lithium, etc. And over the course of time, these leach into the soil and poison the soil. Back in the 1970s, I remember the EPA being so concerned about many of the, I'm trying to think of a place in Buffalo, Love Canal and places like that, What is happening as a result of the solar panels is comparative to that, but happening all over the country, where you have soil that is no longer practicable. You can no longer grow food there because it's being contaminated for the sake of wind and solar power. So next slide. Here's the total score for environmental impact when you take into account the full spectrum of environmental factors. Natural gas, nuclear, finished first. Hydro next, coal next. And again, at the bottom, solar, biomass, and wind power. So that, in summary, is the affordable, reliable, and clean scorecard. That is the roadmap. Policymakers in the United States, but not just in the United States, but also in Germany and around the world. Where you have more wind and solar power, you're going to have more expensive energy. You're going to have less reliable energy. You're going to have blackouts like what was experienced in Spain this year. And just as importantly, because we should care about the environment, we should be good stewards of the environment. I can tell you, I love going out into the wild. I love just celebrating the beauty of nature and the wilderness. We need to protect that. And wind and solar power are absolutely the most devastating forms of electricity production that you can have. It's not just CO2 emissions. We had great presentations yesterday about the supposed CO2, the climate crisis, how it's really not a crisis. But regardless, even if you believe in it, factor in these other environmental factors, especially land conservation. Now, at the Heartland Institute, let me just conclude by saying that this study, Affordable, Reliable, and Clean, we have sent hundreds of copies of these to policymakers around the United States, and it's been a tremendous hit. It's very helpful to have in your bag of weapons, your arsenal, not just to produce and pass good legislation that protects conventional energy, but also to respond to the myths you hear in the media, such as wind and solar are already less expensive. The data that we present is largely specific to America in this study. But appropriately enough, here at the World Prosperity Forum, we are currently in the process of putting together affordable, reliable, and clean for the UK, affordable, reliable, and clean for Austria, affordable, reliable, and clean for Poland. And this is at the request of policymakers in those countries. We might be able to put one together for the EU as a whole, but it's coming soon to a country near you. For the data that you need, both as a concerned citizen and as a policymaker, those who are watching, do an internet search or go to the Heartland Institute website, Affordable, Reliable, Clean, and you'll see the backup for everything here. So with that, I thank you very much for your attention in this presentation. And now I'm going to hand this off, appropriately enough, as we are putting together an affordable, reliable, and clean for the UK. We have joining us today an absolute firebrand in the United Kingdom who has been leading the charge for many years against the net zero nonsense and insanity in the UK. She was especially successful with Car 26, an organization that she herself formed, taking on the Goliath of the environmental movement, taking on the Goliath of the so-called consensus politics. We've been very fortunate to, in the past year, bring her on board with the Heartland Institute with the formation of Heartland UK. So to share some thoughts with you, I am very pleased to introduce the Director of Heartland Institute UK/Europe, Lois Perry.
Thank you very much. What an introduction, and I look forward to doing an in-conversation with you afterwards. My lords, ladies and gentlemen, I'm honoured to be here to talk to you about the exciting developments in the UK. The tide is turning, and this particular tide or sea level, whatever the greenies want to call it, has absolutely nothing to do with alleged climate change, I can assure you. The people have had enough. They've had enough of being poor. They've had enough of living standards being completely annihilated, enough of being told what to do, what to tweet, what opinions to have. Currently 30 arrests per day in the United Kingdom just on social media posts. They've had enough of being told where to go, where they can drive, if they can drive, what they can drive. They've had enough of being cold or having to choose between heating and eating. Of being told that their very existence, that them being alive, that the carbon that they represent is indeed bad for the planet, and that they're racist and they're homophobic or some such nonsense constantly. they're sick of their religion being eroded and demonized, whether that's Christianity or indeed for British Jews, not only their faith, but also their right to exist, full stop, to have a home state, and their entire existence being questioned. But most of all, they're sick that until very recently, there was a cozy consensus between the two main political parties where you couldn't get a proverbial hair's breadth between them on policies such as net zero, economically ruinous net zero policies, but also on mass uncontrolled immigration. But then something happened. Something happened that was so seismic and so earth-shattering that the establishment has taken a while to catch up. Nigel Farage took over as the leader of Reform UK. And with that, the game completely changed. Or, as they say in Sherlock Holmes, the game is now afoot. Suddenly there was a choice. Oh my goodness, a choice. We the British people, we hadn't had a choice for ages. They've got a choice. They've got a choice on everything. They were betrayed on Brexit, ignored on legitimate concerns on immigration, ignored on practically everything. Then suddenly there's a leader of a party with a proven track record, not only of winning, but of defiantly beating the odds. Nigel Farage pretty much single-handedly won the Leave referendum on the UK leaving the EU. In the last general election, they won 5 seats. Now, I can't tell you how much the odds are stacked against a brand new party winning anything in the British Parliament with the first past the post system. All the polls now put, in fact, every single one for the last over 100 polls have shown that Reform UK look likely to win a majority in the next general election and forming a government with Nigel as Prime Minister. But enough about Nigel Farage. For now, I'm often accused of him being the only thing that I talk about. In fact, when Liz Truss interviewed me the other day with James Taylor, she dared me to do an entire interview without mentioning his name. So I had to allude carefully. But James touched a little bit on my background. So I've been doing this for, nearly 4.5 years now. CAR26, Climate Analysis Reason, was formed around the time of COP26. It was a joke about COP26. I actually quite famously went to COP26 and was chased out by security and ended up doing an interview for Rupert Murdoch's Talk TV from the disabled toilet, with the security guards banging on the door and Mike Graham, the presenter, saying, do they believe in free speech at COP26? I said, are you joking, Mike? I said, I'm hiding in the disabled toilet doing an interview with security guards trying to get me out. But anyway, I did my interview. It was quite interesting. It was like this. But you know, I did do it. When I started CAR26 with the backing of 3 Brexit donors, one of which was a Brexit MEP, Lance Foreman, there was 3 guys from Cambridge, and they knew that net zero was Brexit on steroids. Boy, if we were worried about our freedoms being annihilated by Brexit, that had nothing on what they were planning for us with net zero. So they put a bit of money behind me and we got going. There had been some other organisations in the UK, like the GWPF, which had done amazing work. But I think it's fair to say that the powers that be, including Ofcom, who said that I was the most dangerous woman in Britain at one point, weren't expecting a loud blonde Essex girl coming onto television wearing cocktail dresses and talking about, that net zero was a load of rubbish. But it had a big impact. We won the hearts and minds of the British people. They started to see it for a scam. They started to see it for what it was. And I got banned basically from everything for a while. And then everyone started agreeing with me and I was invited back on. In fact, the first time I met, oh God, I'm going to mention him again, NF, was on when he interviewed me on GB News. And actually, he accused me of being a conspiracy theorist at first. The other day, I mentioned that at the lunch that he hosted for us, didn't I, James? He said, oh, well, why would they be doing this? Why would they be doing this, Lois? So isn't it a bit of a conspiracy theory? I think it's fair to say that he's come quite a considerable long way from that. I mean, his original thoughts on saving the planet before before I started nagging 4 years ago was to plant more trees. So I think it's fair to say that we've come a long way from that. It was a big success, Car 26, but like all good things, it came to a close. Basically, I'd spent all their money. No, that's a joke. And I had the massive good fortune to have had a very good working relationship with the Heartland USA. And in fact, James and others had come to my Car 26 dinners, which I hosted quite regularly, which became, I think infamous is a good word. Yeah, slightly infamous, mainly because of me and champagne consumption. But the less we talk about that, the better. And James asked me if I could organise for Nigel to speak in Chicago. And I said, yeah, I'll try. I can't promise, but I'll try. And it was the 40th anniversary of the Heartland Institute, and it was an amazing night. And Nigel spoke, and it was the seed of an idea that night, the seed of an idea that we could have the Heartland UK and Europe. And from that night, it took a few months to come to fruition, but from that night, it was born. That the seed grew into from a little acorn as great oak trees grow, and now I represent. I'm the director, very proudly the director of the Heartland Institute UK and Europe, and we have made huge progress. Huge progress. In fact, NF has on many occasions credited publicly the key role that me personally and the Heartland has played in influencing Reform UK policy. And I am delighted to inform you, those in the room and those online, that directly based on our influence as an organisation, that the policy of Reform UK and their immediate policy when they form the next government is to the complete reindustrialisation of the UK, fueled quite literally by abolishing not some, but all of the net zero policies and targets absolutely immediately. This will include the abolishing of all subsidies for pointless unreliables, as Alex Epstein so succinctly puts them, and the Marxist net zero agenda. Interesting point here on the use of language that the Greenies, I say Greenies, there's nothing green about net zero. The deliberate misuse of language. So using the very finite word fossil for fossil fuels, which we know is nonsense, and the opposite for renewables. So yeah, just a minor aside there. My job as the director of the Heartland Institute UK and Europe is to instill our ideas and policy recommendations into the political mainstream. We are a non-partisan organisation, and we work with anyone who shares our beliefs. In fact, and I got in a lot of trouble for this the other day because I put a picture from the lunch that Nigel Farage hosted for the Heartland Institute UK and Europe. I put them on Twitter and had to take it down, but it's all fine. It's all been ironed out now. I got the impact I wanted. Oh God, did I say that out loud? Yeah, so in fact, there were the reason why it caused a bit of a stir is because there was quite a few Tories there, and the Conservatives were obviously, quite rightly paranoid about defections to Reform UK. In fact, we had the former British Prime Minister Liz Truss, who spoke here on Tuesday. So let's not forget that only 6 months ago, the Conservative Party was wedded to the net zero ideal. I mean, completely wedded. As I said before, there wasn't a proverbial hair's breadth between both parties on that. And now, because of us, and because they slavishly follow Reform UK policy, because they don't want to be completely and utterly pointless, although that's not going that well for them at the moment, they have also pledged to abolish all net zero policies. And that is as a direct result of the work that we as an organisation have done. It would be silly, though, to say that as an organisation, we do not have a very positive relationship with Reform UK. There has been a fertile reception to our work, and Mr. Farage has been very supportive of all of our events in the UK, etc. There is certainly a meeting of minds. This bodes well for the UK, but also for us, And my continued job is to make sure that this branch, my branch of the extraordinary Heartland Institute, headed up by the extraordinary Mr. James Taylor, my big boss, is always at the heartland of the debate. And finally, I just wanted to say that if I'm not awarded a Nobel Peace Prize for perseverance and determination, I may personally invade Greenland or the Chagos Islands myself. Only joking. Thank you to the Heartland Institute for taking a punt on me. I won't let you down. Thank you very much.
Okay, Lois, come on over here.
Okay.
Lois said, I have much to say, but I speak quickly.
It's very.
So we may have a few minutes, and it would be wonderful for us just to talk. Which I agree with. So first of all, Lois, good news for you. We don't have a prohibition on saying Nigel Farage. So you don't have to say NF, because we'll say it to the heavens. And Nigel has been wonderful. He has embodied what we believe in. He believes in freedom. He believes in prosperity. And any politician, no matter what party that they are from, that does that, they're going to have me singing to the heavens with their praises. But that being said, as you mentioned at our luncheon the other day, there were members of the Tories there, and the scandal was you posted this picture of the luncheon, and it's got Nigel speaking, and it's a beautiful picture, but you can see in the foreground all these very prominent Tories that are there at a Nigel Farage luncheon, but they're there because it was a Heartland Institute luncheon. Absolutely. Tell people about your ability to reach across the aisle, and how Heartland, as much as we love reform, we also are connecting with and welcoming Tories.
No, that's absolutely right. And believe it or not, although they're not particularly receptive to the Heartlands message, I do have quite good relationships with a couple of Labour ministers as well. Well, not quite as good as my relationships with the others, but no, I mean, this is the Tories feel, I think, that the only way forward is to embrace freedom and prosperity. They know that what's happened in the past, their net zero stance is one of the reasons why that that they've lost so much support to Reform UK. So yeah, I've got a good relationship with quite a few prominent Conservatives, a lot of which you met the other day. I have been. Actually, a good friend of mine, the Tories, run me up and said, could you stop pinching all of our people for reform? So, but no, on a serious note, definitely, our reach goes far beyond reform. It's anyone that shares our passion and our viewpoint, I will speak to. And so, yeah.
Awesome. And I think back to, it must have been 5 years ago when you started Car 26, and it was amazing because with Car 26 at the time, now we're talking about Tories that are coming over in the UK. That the news is Tories are coming over to reform, but really they're coming over to the freedom movement. Absolutely. Which Heartland has been leading here under your leadership. So going back just about 5 years ago when you started the Car 26 organization fighting net zero, there were almost no Tories that would stand for what we stand, and the Reform Party did not exist. And to this day, we have Boris Johnson, who's still pounding the table for net zero, Theresa May pounding the table for net zero, former prime ministers of the Tory party. So tell us about the headwinds, about how difficult it was to gain traction with Car 26.
Well, I mean, it was extraordinarily difficult at first, which is why I think that the guys that came up with the concept with me of the original organization thought it needed somebody very different to head it up. It needed someone who could cut through, maybe use a bit of humor, maybe a bit of glamour, and actually bust through, take the mickey out of net zero, take the mickey out of all of the idiosyncrasies and the mistakes and the lies, and just show them up. I mean, I actually had a very good friend of mine who works for Rupert Murdoch's channel, Talk TV, tell me, she said, I had a call from Ofcom, and Ofcom is the regulator for British television, basically, and they are super woke, I mean, off the Richter scale. And she said, I had a call from one of the top ladies there saying that Lois Perry is dangerous. because she's laughing at us and people are laughing with her at us. At the net zero agenda, which is so important to them. I mean, the BBC won't have us on. I didn't expect them to be to want to have us on anyway. But I mean, that just shows you when you've got one of the most senior people at Ofcom, the television regulator in the United Kingdom, saying that I'm dangerous, then it shows you that the difficulties that I had. But I was called a denier, nuts. I'm sure all the women in this room, I mean, I would by no means describe myself as a feminist. And in fact, anyone who's, would say that was quite amusing, me talking about women's issues. But, if you don't, if you look a certain way or you are a certain way, you get quite a lot of social media stuff as well from people that don't agree with you. And quite a lot of it's aimed at your appearance and stuff like that. So, but I don't care about that. So, but so it wasn't particularly easy, but I just persevered, kept going, and I engaged the viewers apparently. So I kept getting invited back, and then suddenly there was a click moment, and we had some very big presenters in terms of GB News, Talk TV, and other programs who suddenly started openly saying, not at the beginning, it wasn't necessarily that they thought net zero was a scam, although that came later. The initial thing was, why shouldn't we be allowed to debate it? And I think what opened that door for me, I was pressing on an open door to a certain extent, and I didn't even realize, was follow the science had been, as a phrase, had been a little bit, from the previous couple of years, because it was just after all the lockdowns and the COVID stuff. People thought, hang on a minute, we're being told we're not allowed to question net zero and to follow the science. Yeah, that sounds familiar, and if you're not allowed to question things, if you're not allowed to debate things, why not? So yes, it was difficult, but I do think that the period that we'd had with COVID and everything else made it easier for me, although I didn't realize at the time.
Outstanding. And I can attest to the fact that supplementing your vivacious personality is the fact that
I mean, I'm loud.
No. I mean, vivacious, energetic. When I go to the UK and we're in London, or even when we were in, was it Birmingham for the UK conference?
Yeah.
And other places where you are, everyone knows you. Everyone comes over to say hi to Lois, and it's not just your personality, but you are everywhere on social media. As you mentioned before, you put a picture up on your social media, and it becomes a story for the UK media, for the big London newspapers, which is amazing. And of course, most of what you're accomplishing in that realm is calling attention to the fact that net zero and the energy stupidity of the present administration is causing real harm to Brits. So thank you so much for doing that. It's been a pleasure having you speak today, Lois.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you.
I was speaking. One of my best friends in the world, Craig Rucker, the president of the fantastic organization CFACT, was speaking. Mark Morano was speaking. Ken Ivory was at that event. So it was a time where not only were we going to be at an event that's going to make a public policy difference, but it's a gathering of friends. And believe me, we smoked quite a few cigars in that conference. But anyway, during the course of that conference, as you sit at one table for breakfast, another table for lunch, another table for dinner, cocktail receptions, I met this lady who just had such energy and passion, not just for freedom, but also for wildlife, also for making sure that we're good environmental stewards. And the thing is, for a while, I had no idea who she was or where she came from, because she was very cryptic and telling people, and eventually came out, well, I work for Netflix. And of course, as a conservative, my first thought is, oh, wait, what was I saying in her presence during the past 30 minutes? Okay, I'm hoping that nothing's going to be something that's going to come out as a Netflix expose. But actually, she was someone who loved freedom and became someone that the bunch of us could become friends with. And she's had quite a journey since that time as a conservative, a closet conservative, because that's what it had to be in her position at Netflix, to where she is today. And it's a fascinating story. And with that, I would like to introduce to you Danielle Carl.
Thank you, James. What happens when corporate sustainability commitments move from press releases into people's livelihoods, quietly, internally, and without public scrutiny? When we talk about sustainability, we often focus on metrics, pledges, and glossy reports. But in my experience, one of the most overlooked impacts of sustainability initiatives is who gets to participate in that conversation and who doesn't. Large organizations like Netflix position themselves as leaders in sustainability, and in many ways they are. They have the resources, influence, and reach to shape industry standards and public perception. However, I've observed that when sustainability becomes tightly controlled by a single narrative or agenda, it can unintentionally undermine the very goals it claims to advance. At companies of this scale, dissenting perspectives, even well-intentioned, data-driven ones, are often sidelined if they don't perfectly align with the dominant sustainability framework. The result is not collaboration, but gatekeeping. When alternative approaches, critiques, or region-specific realities are excluded, sustainability stops being adaptive and starts becoming ideological. This matters because sustainability is not a one-size-fits-all solution. Environmental impact varies by geography, infrastructure, labor conditions, and community needs. When a powerful player narrows the range of acceptable viewpoints, it can suppress innovative solutions that must be effective, you'll love this word, equitable, or locally appropriate. In practice, this can lead to performative sustainability, strong branding, but weaker real-world outcomes. What I want to explore today is not whether sustainability matters, but what happens when it becomes enforced through perception rather than discussion. Organizations like Netflix don't just influence their own operations. They influence vendors, creators, employees, and even public discourse. When that influence discourages nuance or debate, the ripple effects are significant. True sustainability requires plurality of thought, ongoing critique, and a willingness to evolve, not just alignment. From what I observed, the future of sustainability depends less on who has the loudest platform and more on who is willing to listen. Progress happens when large institutions use their power to amplify diverse perspectives, not filter them out. I worked at Netflix for approximately 3.5 years, from 2021 to 2025. I supported leadership within the company's sustainability function, which gave me exposure to internal operations, external engagement, and high-level policy events, including COP. Now, COP, for those that don't know, it stands for Conference of the Parties, the annual UN climate conference where governments, corporations, and NGOs negotiate global climate policy. Now, I won't speculate on intention or motivation. I will only describe what I personally observed, and I will not or can't share anything that violates my NDA. Netflix publicly presents sustainability as values-driven, inclusive, and collaborative. That is the public-facing narrative. Internally, I observed a far more rigid operational environment, one where alignment was assumed rather than discussed, and where deviation, even perceived deviation, carried consequences. An example of this is while attending COP28 in Dubai, I had an informal breakfast conversation with another conference attendee around a shared interest completely unrelated to Netflix. Wolves. I love wolves. They are an integral part of our environment. I've dedicated a lot of my time to research about wolves, and we were discussing a series of books by world-renowned biologist Rick McIntyre. He has written a spectacular account of the wolves in Yellowstone. A colleague of mine passed by. I invited him over to us and introduced him to this engaging individual. The interaction was polite, but short, as my colleague declined to join us. I met our group in the lobby later that same morning, and I noticed a clear change in tone and vibe. Nothing was said directly, but the shift was unmistakable. For those of you that have seen the Mean Girls movie, think of that. As we headed out, the two of them walked ahead of me, whispering to each other and occasionally looking back at me. Later that evening, I received a text implying I had engaged in some sort of inappropriate interaction with an outside organization. The organization reference was not even the one I had spoken with earlier. But when the correction was made, it only seemed to cause further upset because this individual was associated with a policy organization that, within certain circles, is considered controversial. That engaging individual was James Taylor, the president of the Heartland Institute. I was confused because nothing I had done involved Netflix's business, confidential information, or policy violations. From that point forward, I would no longer be invited to travel with my group. Now, I'm not asserting why. I'm simply describing the sequence of events and the outcome. What that experience taught me is how quickly professional standing can change, not based on actions, but perception alone. And once perception becomes policy, trust evaporates. This matters because sustainability initiatives influence hiring, access, visibility across major corporations, especially the entertainment industry. We often talk about influence at the university level, but what's equally powerful is the content people binge, absorb, and normalize. Let's take Taylor Sheridan, for example. He has numerous hit shows from Yellowstone to Landman. In an episode of Landman, Billy Bob Thornton explains that the windmills are 400 feet tall and that the concrete foundation covers a third of an acre and goes down in the ground 12 feet, and that oil companies own them as alternative energy when their wells are located off-grid. He further explains how much diesel has to be burned to mix that concrete or make the steel, to haul them out to the location and put it together with a 400-foot crane. He mentions how much oil is used to lubricate the windmill, that the windmill itself has a 20-year lifespan and will not offset the carbon footprint of making it. This episode alone, or rather the scene in the show, had the impact of sending a sustainability department in a tizzy. Why? Because it's truthful? Or rather because Landman is content, and that content has reach. It disrupted a carefully curated sustainability narrative, not because it was inflammatory, but because it reached millions of viewers. When alignment becomes an unspoken requirement rather than an open conversation, independence quietly disappears, and it creates risk for employees and ultimately for the institutions themselves. Sustainability should never require uniformity of thought. When perception outweighs performance, integrity becomes a liability instead of an asset. Once integrity becomes a liability, something even more dangerous happens. Ideas getting filtered not by merit, but ideology. Ideology. I know I should have switched that word. Back in December 2019, it was widely reported that Netflix was heavily expanding its children's and family content in order to compete with competitors like Disney+. This signaled opportunity, especially for educational and value-driven storytelling. Having a deep respect for agriculture communities, I was concerned that entire regions and perspectives were missing from the sustainability conversation. So I searched for content that spoke to real-world impact and found a documentary titled "No Farmers, No Food. Will You Eat the Bugs?" An Epoch Times documentary. That's what actually got me into Texas, where James was just talking about. The title alone, "No Farmers, No Food," underscores a universal truth. The documentary simply presented farmers' concerns and allowed viewers to draw their own conclusion from what was shown. When I suggested it internally as relevant programming tied to sustainability and food systems, it was immediately dismissed and labeled politically extreme before any discussion of the material itself. What struck me wasn't the rejection, it was that the conversation ended before it began. I then made another suggestion, this time for children's educational content. Rick McIntyre, I've mentioned earlier, one of the world's leading wolf biologists, had released a beautifully written children's series rooted in real science, ecology, and lessons from the natural world. It was exactly the kind of material that inspires curiosity, conservation awareness, and respect for nature. I thought it aligned perfectly with Netflix's public environmental messaging. Again, the idea went nowhere, and I was then discouraged from pursuing further discussion of it internally. What became clear over time was that ideas were only welcomed if they originated from a very small internal circle. External perspectives, even educational, non-political ones, were treated with suspicion if they didn't fit a pre-approved narrative. Not because they lacked value, but because the suggestion didn't come from that small internal circle. And that's the deeper issue. When sustainability becomes centralized through gatekeepers rather than open inquiry, it stops being about the planet and it starts being about controlling the narrative. It limits creativity, it limits truth, it quietly teaches employees that curiosity itself can be risky. I'm sharing this because my experience is part of a much larger problem. Netflix on paper is positioned as a sustainability leader. It has the resources, visibility, and influence to move the needle in meaningful ways. From where I sit, real sustainability requires humility and openness. It requires creating space for uncomfortable conversations and competing ideas. Large organizations have the power to lead, but leadership in this context should mean amplifying voices, not silencing the ones that complicate the narrative. The narrowing of perspective doesn't just affect internal culture, it affects people. Individuals who raise alternative viewpoints, whether about environmental trade-offs or simply having conversations at breakfast with an enemy, can feel discouraged from speaking up. Over time, sustainability stops being a collaborative effort and starts feeling more like an ideological box you're either inside of or excluded from. What's frustrating is that this approach actually works against sustainability itself. Environmental challenges are complex, regional, and deeply human. When a dominant player filters out dissent or nuance, it limits innovation and suppresses solutions that may be more effective or more, again, you'll know the word, equitable. In my experience, the most meaningful progress comes from friction, questions, disagreement, and continuous recalibration, not from uniformity. Because of Netflix's scale, these choices ripple outward. As I said, vendors, partners, creatives, and even the broader public take cues from how sustainability is framed and enforced. When only one version of acceptable sustainability is allowed, it can unintentionally stifle better outcomes and reduce sustainability to performance rather than impact. Go to Netflix's website and read about their net zero policy, a policy that was updated on June 27th, 2024. And while the updated version still acknowledges the same targets in broad terms, Netflix planned to achieve net zero greenhouse gas emissions by the end of 2022 and every year thereafter under its net zero plus nature plan, including cutting scope 1 and 2 emissions nearly in half by 2030. The reframing that you'll read now is Netflix reaffirms its climate targets remain unchanged, but references ongoing debates about how net zero is defined, focusing on how its targets contribute to broader global goals. Emphasis on contributing to global net zero goals rather than asserting a fixed net zero outcome. So the bullet points here are: sustainability commitments shape hiring decisions, content development, internal access, and influence. When alignment is assumed rather than discussed, curiosity becomes risk, dissent becomes disloyalty, and perception becomes consequence. If sustainability is going to succeed, especially at scale, it must remain open to disagreement, grounded in reality, and humble enough to evolve. Sustainability and what everybody's trying to accomplish is not strengthened by conformity. It is strengthened by courage, the courage to question, to listen, and to allow complexity into the room. Otherwise, once again, it becomes performative, well-branded, but brittle. Brittle systems don't break when challenged. They break when reality finally shows up.
Thank you so much, Danielle. That was awesome. That was her first time ever in a public speaking event, like in a forum like this. So you were amazing. Thank you for sharing your story. So you may have noticed throughout the week that there have been quite a few Polish speakers and contributors to the World Prosperity Forum. And part of it is by the happenstance of where there is expertise available to speak, but part of it is probably because Poland may well be my favorite country outside the United States. If it's not there, it's pretty darn close, but I think it just might be. It's amazing the history of the country and the people. This is a country that has been sandwiched between two historically expansionist, militarily powerful countries, Russia and Germany. Throughout many centuries, the nation has come close to extinction, actually has experienced extinction as a political entity, and yet the Polish people survived as a distinct people, as a distinct culture. And today, within the freedom movement, as we understand the value, the importance of distinctive nations and cultures, and not just a mosh pit of one cultural single entity, Poland is just a prime example of how people will fight for their freedom and for their identity. When I was putting together this conference with the help of colleagues, one of the first people who came to my mind was Stanislav Starnowski, who spoke yesterday. Stan, over my experience and my friendship with Stan over the years, has introduced me to some of the most influential and important people in Poland, and I'm very grateful for that. Stan has tremendous not only knowledge and expertise, but just judgment and understanding of people and what their potential and impact are. So for our next speaker, when Stan said to me, there's one person you really need to have on your program, I said, done. Your word is good enough for me. And learning more about him, I understand that this is certainly the case. Our next speaker is going to be talking about how Polish civil society is oftentimes butting heads against the Brussels elites. And in a way, it's another iteration of how Poland has had to fight oppression from outsiders who are trying to shape Polish society. And our next speaker is definitely one of the champions of freedom and of Poland in this effort. So our next speaker is Adrian Kubicki. Adrian Kubicki is a formal Consul General of Poland in New York and spokesperson for LOT Polish Airlines. By the way, I've flown LOT Airlines back and forth across the Atlantic a couple times. Fantastic. And he's a political advisor, president and co-founder of Republic of Relations. As a journalist, he contributed to leading Polish radio stations and media outlets, focusing on humanitarian and development issues. He joined LOT Polish Airlines in 2014 and rose to the position of communications director and spokesperson. He was instrumental in the Bezwiz do USA, I'm sure that's not even close to the proper pronunciation, campaign, which played a pivotal role in Poland's inclusion in the U.S. visa waiver program, and that is a good thing. From March 2020 to June 2024, he served as Consul General of Poland in New York City. During his tenure, he focused on supporting the Polish diaspora, strengthening Polish-American relations, and fostering cultural and economic ties. He holds a bachelor's degree in social sciences from the University of Warsaw and a master's degree in international relations from Collegium Civitas. It's my pleasure to introduce Adrian Kubicki.
All right. Hello, everyone. And thank you, James, for having me here for this kind introduction. And thank you, Stan, for recommending me. Now I have to live up to it. And hopefully this is one of many occasions that I'll be able to share my thoughts with you. It seems to me at first glance this topic is pretty obvious and simple. Having the stance of Poland, a long-lasting stance of Poland, being in a contrary to of the Brussels elite, so-called, perceive as the future of Europe and the future in reality of all of us who live in this continent. I think that Europe today lives somewhere between a comforting illusion and a brutal reality. The illusion is that politics can be reduced to management, to rules, procedures, expert consensus, and regulatory compliance. The reality is that history has returned, armed, unapologetic, and very violent. Ladies and gentlemen, the Russian war against Ukraine shattered the post-Cold War belief that the peace in Europe was permanent and automatic. It reminded us of a truth that Poland, perhaps more than any other European nation, has never fully forgotten. Civil society, democracy, and prosperity exist only where security exists first. This fact matters deeply for today's topic. The tension between Polish civil society and what we call the Brussels elites is not merely cultural, legal, or ideological. It is also strategic. It concerns who decides how Europe defends itself, how power is distributed, and whose judgment ultimately matters when threats are real rather than theoretical. From conservative perspective, the Polish case exposes a fundamental European question. Will Europe remain a community of self-governing nations capable of defending themselves, or will it evolve into a post-national administrative system that is incapable to act timely and assumes security will always be provided by others? For a vast majority of Polish people and most of conservatives globally, I guess, civil society is not an abstraction and not a slogan. It is a dense network of institutions between the individual and the state, like families, churches, trade unions, professional guilds, municipalities, voluntary associations, and cultural traditions. These institutions form character, transmit responsibility, and create loyalty. This understanding is rooted in European thought, from Edmund Burke's Little Platoons to Alexis de Tocqueville's observation that associations are the school of freedom, to the Christian principle of subsidiarity, later embedded in European treaties, something that European Union is actually built upon. Civil society, in this view, is not anti-state. It is pre-state and pro-state at the same time. It produces the citizens without whom no state, especially a democratic one, can ever function. And crucially, civil society also produces something else, something very, very clearly observable on Polish example: resilience, the ability of society to endure shocks, economic, cultural, and militarily, without collapsing. This is why civil society cannot be replaced by NGOs alone or by transnational advocacy networks, nor by administrative coordination. It must be rooted, local, and it must be national. Polish civil society is not a fashionable concept imported from academic discourse. It is a historical fact. Under communist rule, when the state claimed total authority over Poland, Polish society built parallel structures simply based on morality. The Solidarity movement, very well known, with around 10 million members at its peak, was not simply a trade union. It was alternative social order, workers, intellectuals, priests, students, organizing without permission. This matters because it shaped a political instinct that persists today. Suspicion of centralized power without accountability, preference for bottom-up organization, and I believe that legitimacy comes from participation, not procedure. When Poland regained sovereignty in 1989, these instincts did not disappear. They re-emerged in voter turnout, how these votes are being distributed, in local government, in community life, and in moments of crisis, most recently in the response to the Ukrainian war. Millions of Ukrainian refugees were absorbed not by an EU mechanism, but by Polish households, municipalities, employers, churches, and volunteers. This was civil society acting at scale. Poland did not wait for Europe to tell us how to act morally. It acted, and Europe benefited. Frankly, if you recall, with the initial hesitation of some of the Western European countries, we helped Europe save face. It was very clearly visible from my New York position as a consul general at the time. To speak of Brussels elites is not to attack Europe or Europeans. It is to describe a specific mode of governance. Brussels represents a dense ecosystem of institutions, commissions, courts, agencies, consultancies, expert panels, and professionalized NGOs. This ecosystem tends to operate according to certain assumptions. Wherever there is a problem diagnosed, there must be solved by regulation. Everything has to be regulated. Legitimacy flows from legal correctness. Uniformity is preferable to diversity. Boy, does that ring a bell in Poland in particular. And ultimately, compliance is a substitute for consent. This system excels at standardization. It struggles with pluralism, especially when pluralism expresses itself as national resistance grounded in democratic mandates. From a conservative perspective, the problem is not that Brussels exists, but that this increasingly confuses administrative authority with political legitimacy. This confusion becomes dangerous when it extends into areas that touch the foundations of sovereignty, like the definition of rule of law, borders and the migration crisis, or the energy, but above all, security. The return of war to Europe changes the terms of the debate. Russia is not merely a regional problem. It is revisionist power willing to use force to redraw borders and threaten neighbors. For countries like Poland, the threat is not abstract, it is geographic and historical. It is enough to remind that out of 300 of recent years of Polish history, we spent over 250 under Russian oppression in various forms. Security cannot be crowdsourced. It cannot be delegated entirely to technocrats, and it cannot be sustained without national political will. Poland understood that earlier than most. By 2024, it was spending over 4% of GDP on defense, where 2% is agreed minimum, and the realistic average would probably fall below, even below that number. That's how we built one of the largest land forces in Europe. This was not driven by ideology, it was driven by geography. At the same time, Poland has been explicit about something Brussels often hesitates to admit. Sadly, European security without the United States of America is not credible, neither now nor in any foreseeable future. NATO remains the cornerstone of European defense because it combines European manpower and American strategic capabilities, especially nuclear deterrence and power projection. Calls for strategic autonomy sound appealing, but they risk to becoming strategic evasion, a way to rhetorically distance Europe from the United States without building the actual capabilities needed to replace it. This doesn't sound very much like realism, but more like wishful thinking. I think as conservatives, we don't romanticize alliances. We value them because they work. The United States remains the primary guarantor of European security. Yet it seems that American attention is coming to sort of an end. And this creates a paradox. Europe needs United States of America more than ever, but at the same time, the United States expects Europe to do more. Poland's approach resolves that paradox through action rather than rhetoric, by investing heavily in its own defense while strengthening transatlantic ties. It's not a contradiction. This is also where the tension with Brussels reappears. A Europe that over-centralized politically while under-investing militarily creates dependency without responsibility. A Europe that lectures nations on values while relying on American taxpayers for defense undermines its own credibility. And in the meantime, sovereignty and alliance are not opposites. They are complements. Security is not only about tanks and missiles, it is also about energy, industry, and social cohesion. Poland's energy mix, still heavily reliant on coal, is often criticized in Brussels as backward. Yet, we ask a different question. Can a nation has a right to defend itself if its energy system is fragile, expensive, and externally dependent? Uniform climate targets imposed by European Union without regard to national starting points risk undermining industrial capacity and social stability of the entire Europe, both essential for defense and readiness. Europe's energy transition must be strategic, not ideological. It must preserve industrial strength, protect households, and maintain autonomy in crisis conditions. Here again, subsidiarity matters not as an excuse for inaction, but as a principle of intelligent governance. Poland, roughly 38 million society, has a vibrant NGO sector numbering of over 160,000 organizations. But conservatives observe, using diplomatic term, an asymmetry. Brussels tends to recognize as civil society exclusively those organizations that mirror its own ideological preferences and professional culture. Locally rooted associations, in particular religious, family-oriented, and patriotic, often find themselves marginalized or even stigmatized. This creates a democratic distortion. Civil society becomes filtered through elite approval. Popular participation is replaced by stakeholder management, and moral disagreement is reframed as non-compliance. A society capable of defending itself cannot afford this narrowing of legitimate voices. Pluralism is not a threat to Europe, it is Europe's inheritance. The conflict between Polish civil society and Brussels elites is not about money nor even about individual policies. It is about who decides, who defines Europe's moral boundaries, who sets the balance between unity and diversity, who carries responsibility for security, and who merely administers it. Poland's position challenges a silent assumption that legitimacy flows upward from institutions to people. We insist on the opposite. Legitimacy flows upward only because it first flows from below. Ladies and gentlemen, as I said at the beginning, Poland stands in a crossroads. One path leads towards an increasingly centralized post-national system, confident in regulations, uneasy with democracy, dependent on external security guarantees it hesitates to acknowledge at the end of the day. The other path leads towards a Europe of strong nations, cooperating voluntarily, respecting subsidiarity, investing seriously in defense, and anchored in a living civil society. Poland's experience matters because it demonstrates something very essential. A society can be modern without being rootless. It can be European without being post-national. It can be democratic without surrendering sovereignty. And it can be allied with the United States without losing dignity and this deep connection with Europe. In an age of Russian aggression, strategic uncertainty, and cultural fragmentation, Europe does not need less Poland. It needs, in fact, more of what Poland represents. Seriousness about security, respect for civil society, and courage to insist that freedom must be defended, not merely managed. The conservative message is very simple, and it is European at its core. A Europe that cannot defend itself cannot remain free. A Europe that forgets its nations will lose its citizens. And a Europe that distrusts its people will not survive that history's return. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Adrian. Listening to his speech, I was particularly drawn to his comments about Solidarity, Solidarity Labor Union back in the 80s, standing up to the Soviet Union and delivering the Polish people, not just the Polish people. Well, let's start with the Polish people. Delivering the Polish people from the oppression of the communist Soviet Empire. And by the way, the same leftist principles of socialism enforced through secret police and lack of diversity of thought, the same system and inevitable goals that Donald Kendall and others talked about. Poland also, the Polish people in solidarity delivered the world in a way from that same oppression if the people were behind the Iron Curtain, or threat if we weren't. Because until that time, the thought was, hey, there's no way that this Cold War is going to end. There's no way that the Iron Curtain could ever fall. The grip was vice-like on Eastern Europe. And with the victory of solidarity, with the victory of the Polish people, that set in motion the chain of events that led to the fall of the Berlin Wall. It's ironic that I remember seeing a political cartoon in the newspaper, and it had the author had drawn a picture of the Statue of Liberty, and the Statue of Liberty was holding a dustbin and using a small hand broom to brush the hammer and sickle, in other words, into the dustbin of history. And yet we're still fighting those forces today. Here at the World Prosperity Forum, we've presented quite a few stories of success, and freedom is rising in so many ways when we see in America, many countries of Europe, in Central and South America, the grassroots freedom movement rising up, taking power in many countries, on the path of ascension to gaining power in other countries. And it's quite inspirational. But there is a topic that weighs heavily on my heart. And I thought it was very important, and I hope I don't have to discuss it long, because it'll be a talk that wrenches my heart a little bit. But I think we need to discuss it or think about it as people who love freedom. Because democracy, as we know it, and the impartial rule of law are right now in danger, teetering on collapse. There is an anvil being positioned above our heads to take everything that we cherish in terms of freedom, democracy, the rule of law, and take it away. And that is the political weaponization of the law and even of the judiciary itself, the judicial branch that's supposed to safeguard our freedoms and be a tenet of our democratic republic in America. And we see the same threats throughout the world. What's happening in nation after nation, including the United States, is the political left is accelerating its use and abuse of the legal process to forbid conservative candidates from running for office, invalidating the will of the people who choose conservative candidates, criminalizing and imprisoning conservative politicians, really for the crime of being a conservative policymaker or conservative influential. This is happening deliberately, not just by people on the left abusing the legal system, but with the willing consent of so many people, judges in particular, who believe that they themselves are the ones who have the ability and should be steering policy, who should be imposing the obstacles to the will of the people when they disagree. And the consequences are already severe. We've seen this, and they're becoming more severe. Unless we wake up, and wake up very quickly, all of the gains that we're experiencing, all of the blessings of liberty will be taken away as that anvil drops on our head. Now, here in America, when you think about it, it's quite amazing. I've heard sometimes a few Republicans, many Democrats, but even a few Republicans, that this president has been convicted by a jury of his peers. He's a convicted felon. What really is a jury of your peers? Okay, an American citizen, true. Back in 1776, the American colonists had to fear the British Empire. They were part of it, but they were also not a part of it, or at least a separate entity in a way. That was their fear. And the protection was, hey, if the king is going to present charges against an American citizen, he has a right to an impartial jury. In fact, it's written in the Sixth Amendment itself. The text of the Sixth Amendment in our Constitution: in all criminal prosecutions, the accused shall enjoy the right to a speedy and public trial by an impartial jury of the state and district wherein the crime shall have been committed. Now, Cornell University, their Legal Information Institute, in describing this Sixth Amendment guarantee to an impartial jury, they title their discussion "Jury of One's Peers." Now, the term peers doesn't appear in the Constitution, but the Constitution does give us the right to an impartial jury. According to Cornell University, describing the Sixth Amendment, a jury of one's peers refers to a defendant's constitutional right to have a trial by a jury made of fellow citizens. And I think that's a reasonable interpretation. What is a peer for Donald Trump? Why is it that cases brought by the federal government under the Biden administration were always presented in the federal district court for Washington, D.C., where the voting public is north of 95% Democrat. Why is it that these cases, the civil cases, are brought in the Southern District of New York City, where again, an overwhelming number of people serving on the jury are Democrats? Now, certainly we've seen judges who clearly are not partial, who clearly would like to convict Donald Trump, but it's not just that. And oftentimes, many people in Washington, D.C. and in the media, they'll focus on Judge Boasberg, and he deserves that scorn and exposure. But would it really matter if he had a fair judge? Recent polling shows that a majority of Democrats would be in favor of putting Donald Trump in prison. They don't give a reason. Now, okay, you can say, well, in the news, people have seen the accusations of not turning over his papers, his personal papers, rapidly enough to the National Archives. Okay. He's been accused of, let's see, in Mar-a-Lago. If you've ever been to Palm Beach, I can assure you, if you can find a little 2-bedroom cracker box house, there aren't very many left. There are a few on a small plot of land, not on the beach, not on the bay. I guarantee you, you're getting millions for that because of the value of the land. Here you've got Donald Trump with this vast estate, Mar-a-Lago, the ocean, and the bay and the lake. So the accusation was, well, he valued it more than 15 or 20 million or whatever they said it's worth. Come on. Unbelievable. Public property, anybody could look at. The institution where he applied for a loan says, we don't have a problem with it. Anyway, it would not have mattered, and it did not matter. We have a problem in this country. And by the way, I just mentioned a few. There's a reason why in Georgia you had an activist prosecutor in Fulton County, Georgia. In other words, inner city Atlanta, where again, the people are overwhelmingly anti-Trump, Democratic, and as we know, more than half. And by the way, when I say Donald Trump, they say the same thing for Elon Musk with some undefined crime. No one's ever made any accusation of any specific statute Elon has violated, other than he has been a vociferous conservative looking to cut government waste. And for that, most Democrats want to put him in prison. So cases are brought in Fulton County, Georgia. Cases are brought in Washington, D.C. Cases are brought in the Southern District of New York. And when they had no choice, when the federal government had no choice but to bring their case against Donald Trump, when they said his holding on to personal papers and paraphernalia, and when asked about it, rather than turning them over to the National Archives, and he said, here they are. I don't think you have a right to take them. Let's work this out in court if we have a legal disagreement. And by the way, okay, you asked me to secure them in this room. I've done that. They tried to convict him of felony charges for that. The only place they could bring that case was in Florida. And we saw what happened when you have a legal system working its course in a purplish reddish state with a judge that is not coming from the intellectual, anti-conservative, never Trump elite. You actually had justice. Moving forward. Well, before we move forward with what we can do about it, it's not just America, the rest of the world. In Poland recently, you had 2 former members of the executive branch that were basically doing what Elon Musk was doing, fighting corruption, carving it out. And then you had the party on the left that hated them for doing it. So they bring charges against him. The president of Poland, who has the power to pardon, even though he knows they didn't do anything wrong, but he also knows that if the left ever takes power, they'll probably try to imprison them. He grants them a pardon. And what happens? The Polish courts said, go arrest them. And they were arrested. And to this day, they have to fear being in Poland. Hungary has granted, I believe it was Hungary that granted them protected status. And where's the outrage? In Romania, just in the past year, they have multiple steps, tiers of elections in their process. You had the conservative candidate who surprised the establishment, taking on a anti-EU. In other words, look, we don't want the European Union to dictate what happens in our country. We want to stand for what Romanians want. And for too long, Romania hasn't quite lived up to that vision that most of their people believe in. So you had the pro-Romanian, anti-EU, conservative, grassroots, populist conservative candidate surprising in the first round of the polls. And as they go to the second round, which will be the final round to determine who is now going to lead the country, you had the court, the Romanian court, saying, no, this person can't run and is disqualified because there were a few ads out on the internet supporting this candidate that we think Russia might have made or paid for. Like as if they have this hypnotic power to overcome and change the will of the people with a few Facebook videos. It was later shown that it had nothing to do with Russia. Didn't matter. That person's disqualified. So, all right, next person who comes up. Now, the thought process was the first candidate had some political experience and knowledge and gravitas. With this person out, the conservative populist replacement is not going to have much of a chance. So you have one coming out of nowhere. And guess what? The polling shows that this person's going to win. So the Romanian courts step in again. This person is not qualified to be on the ballot. We're going to cancel elections a second time. Finally, the third time, when the Romanian people, worn down, beaten down by this, no longer with that enthusiasm to make the change, with the belief they can make the change, the poll showing this third candidate's not going to have quite as good of a chance, then elections were allowed to be held. That's the courts. It's the courts in Poland. It was the courts in Romania. The courts are supposed to be the entities that interpret the law. They don't have any enforcement power of themselves. The enforcement power is the executive, and it's the moral authority that the people will respect the courts. And if you are the executive and you don't want to enforce the court's decisions, in the Federalist Papers spelled out quite clearly, the will of the people is going to be that moral force. But in America and around the world, the court's integrity, their impartiality is being deliberately eradicated. You talk about an insurrection against democratic republics, against the constitutional rule of law. Folks, that's what we're looking at. France, Marine Le Pen, her national party, rising in the polls, a threat to the establishment, to the pro-EU bureaucracy. So there was an assertion made that many years ago, some of the funding that the EU gives for representatives of the various countries to have assistants. They get a certain budget from which they can hire assistants to help them with their work in the EU Parliament. The allegation, very poorly supported, was that Marine Le Pen and a few others in her party took that minimal money, because these aren't multimillionaires they're hiring to work as assistants. And guess what? They hired people who really served more as functionaries of the party rather than as EU bureaucratic people. Folks, what they're saying is that here's their money, you get to hire your assistants. And the allegation is, oh, but your assistants, they actually kind of serve more to advance Marine Le Pen and what she believes in than just dispassionately and objectively just doing what the EU Parliament likes. Oh my gosh, could we have a field day with that, with Adam Schiff and Hillary Clinton and all others? This ridiculously silly charges of such a minimal amount. And by the way, if there is a violation, that's the EU's issue. But the French courts, in France, this wasn't money coming from the French government. The French courts determined that Marine Le Pen, for doing that, coincidentally, as polls show, that she would otherwise be very likely to be the next prime minister and leading the grassroots populism movement and overhauling the leftist, collectivist, bureaucratic pro-EU state. Because of that, poorly supported allegation, 5 years in prison, 5 years unable to run for public office, conveniently missing out on a chance to run in the next elections. In Germany, the Alternative for Democracy, AfD, get branded as the modern day fascists because they're not the socialist leftist elites. They are fast becoming the most popular party in Germany. Even when scurrilous accusations and defamation and name calling does not work, perhaps precisely because it does not work. You have authorities in the EU Parliament, within the German government itself, referencing AfD, pointing to the Romanian elections and how when the conservative populace was poised to win, got booted the next one. They look at AfD and they publicly say, we are not afraid to do the same thing to the AfD. They justify it by calling them fascist, Nazi, whatever stupid, unrelated claims. But the whole point of what they say we should fear is the end of democracy from the AfD. The end of democracy is when you don't allow the people to elect their representatives. We've seen this in Brazil. It's amazing. Lula, who had previously been convicted of a felony, under Brazilian law, if you're convicted of a felony, you are not allowed to run for the presidency. Now, that was established long before these people were involved, particularly. There you go. So the court said, well, Lula, coming from the left, no, yeah, it's a law. Yeah, it's been in place. But we just don't think it should apply here. So he gets to run. He wins the election, contested election over Bolsonaro. And now Bolsonaro is facing imprisonment. Coincidentally, it's funny how all the allegations, whether it's fraud or, in Poland, I don't even know what they call it, being too energetic and cutting waste, it's always the courts entertaining and ruling against grassroots populist conservatives. And then in the media, they say that those same grassroots populist conservatives are a threat to democracy. Unbelievable. So what do you do about it? Because what we saw under Joe Biden against Donald Trump, what we see around the world with other nations and other judicial forces, are likely to happen again exponentially the next time we have a Democratic president, and especially if there's a Democratic president and a Democrat-controlled Senate. There are options. One of the solutions I would like to see happen has to happen soon in case there is a flip in the House of Representatives or the Senate. But federal legislation that would say if you're a public figure and or especially if you have a political nexus, that you must be tried in criminal or civil cases with a jury pool that is no more than 60% of one particular party. Because there is no valid conviction of a Republican figure in the Southern District of New York, in the Federal District of Columbia, the Federal District Court for the District of Columbia. And similarly, as I mentioned earlier, that the court's decisions, the court's power depend largely on public support and opinion and validity. What prevents, if this continues unabated, if this happens again on steroids under a Kamala Harris or Gavin Newsom administration? Okay, playing by those rules, what prevents, look at Donald Trump, farcical allegations of sexual assault that couldn't even survive an initial criminal complaint that happened more than 20 years ago. And I don't know how to put this. The woman was not attractive. It's not very credible. You're Donald Trump and you're going to, anyway. And yet you have the verdict. And by the way, after the judge allowed the civil trial verdict, because even in New York, criminal charges would be laughed out of court. But, you don't have to get a prosecutor to agree to bring civil charges. So the civil verdict was for $5 million. In the course of having his name publicly smeared with the allegations, Donald Trump said, I didn't do it. And for that, the plaintiff filed another claim, $84 million for defamation. In other words, someone can accuse you publicly, and if you say no, I didn't do it, Donald Trump, even for Donald Trump, $80-some million is a lot of money. So what's to prevent, as this continues, the next time that Gavin Newsom is making a tour of Idaho, Oklahoma, Arizona, what prevents a local prosecutor from doing to him what was done by Fannie Willis, I believe, in Fulton County, Georgia? What prevents the tit for tat of finding a jurisdiction and maybe even making up claims that are farcical on their face? But if you find you can have a plaintiff in Ruby Ridge, Idaho, that may want to make up something that everybody in the world knows is true, but you know what? It's time for payback. Because that's what happened to Donald Trump. That's what happened to many others besides Donald Trump who have spent time in federal prison for that. Regardless of whether you think Donald Trump did this or did that for the charges, criminal and civil, against him, there is absolutely no moral authority to be presenting these cases in courts of law where you have, forget about biased judges, that's certainly the case where he was tried, but jury pools that are not a jury of your peers, that are not impartial. The more important term, the precise term, is impartial. How can you argue that in Washington, D.C., you're going to get an impartial jury on a public figure? How could you argue that in Ruby Ridge, Idaho, that you'd be able to get an impartial jury if they wanted to haul in members of the Clinton administration back in the day? I'd love to see that take place. It's especially important for those of us who love freedom, because we are the ones who are more frequently attacked in the judicial system, the political weaponization, including by the judges themselves. But just as importantly, for the protection of all people, regardless of where you stand. Because without that, it's hard to envision our constitutional government, our democracy, continuing. If we have an exponential increase in the political weaponization of the judiciary to imprison people based on their political views, we become a banana republic. We become susceptible to a coup, an uprising, either by armed forces affiliated with the government to fully crack down, or the people having enough. So perhaps even if there is a change in the House, a change in the Senate, later on a change in the presidency, I think it's crucial for our country that we institute such reforms. And maybe there are better specific ways of doing it, but I don't think there's any person with a political nexus who should ever be subjected to a jury pool that is more than 60% hostile to that person of their beliefs. All right, with that off my chest, it is so important. I did want to talk about it and at the end today, but this has been a tremendous day. It's been a tremendous week. Freedom is rising, and if we avoid such pitfalls, as I just discussed, I think the future is very bright. And I do believe in the spirit and the discernment of the American people. My experience is in America, but I do believe that when the people have control over their governments anywhere in this world, truth, discernment, justice will win out. And with that, we're going to have one final panel with today's speakers, but that concludes the presentations at the World Prosperity Forum. And we thank you very much, coming to you from Zurich, Switzerland, and hopefully coming to you again here next year. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, James Taylor. I'd like to invite all of the speakers from today. Hi, my name, as you probably know, if you've been watching for over the 5 days, Jim Lakely, Executive Vice President at Heartland and panelist moderator all week long. So we have Lois and Danielle and Adrian and James as well. So yes, have a seat. I took some notes. We have some people online who've been watching our stream all day and all week who have some questions as well. So we have lots to get into. It's going to be should be very, very interesting and fun. I actually want to start, let's look at my notes here. I wanted to start actually with Danielle. Your presentation today was fantastic, and it was unique. I mean, it was something that you and I have talked a little bit offline here, and I'm kind of fascinated by Hollywood and and the motivations for the things they produce, and inside stories on certain programming and all that stuff. But and so is Donald Kendall as well. We talk about that a lot, and I think the reason why your presentation talking about your experience at Netflix and your experience in show business in Hollywood is important because, you know, it was Andrew Breitbart 20 some years ago, probably at least, who said that politics is downstream from culture, and our culture, like it or not, is not in books and poetry and theater. It is in television and increasingly streaming. And so the motivations of those who produce that programming matters. And if their motivation is to push an ideological idea one over another, that has an impact. That has an impact on our society at large. People complain about, propaganda. The reason people engage in propaganda, or powerful institutions engage in propaganda, is because propaganda works. And that's why Netflix, your discussion about Netflix was really interesting. So I want to talk a little bit, or ask you a few questions about that, and maybe get some observations from the rest of the panel on this as well. The focus of your presentation, Danielle, was on the sustainability program or agenda or commitment, whatever it was, however you may, I should say, characterize it from Netflix. That's all just BS, right? I mean, they're not they're not really serious about getting sustainability, because just the energy they need for all of the servers and for all of their equipment, for all the programming and all of that, has to be a huge leave a big carbon footprint if you care about that. And some of the production that they do, like the Meghan Markle show, as ever, or I'm sorry, no, that's her product. With love, Meghan. My understanding, all right, I'm obsessed with that show a little bit, but because it's so bad, and I enjoy watching it, hate watching it, but I think she had a staff of 80, and she didn't use her own home, so they had to rent another home, and there's all the lighting, and the show was a flop. I'm rambling a little bit here. I guess I'll get right back to the original question. When Netflix talks about a sustainability agenda, their actions seem to belie the idea of really being sustainable, and they seem to want to make it up by filling their programming with green propaganda, and they think that is some sort of penance, or that'll wipe the slate clean if they feel guilty about it. Am I reading that right or wrong?
Well, Hollywood. I will say that one initiative, and what you were talking about is what they call dirty streaming, and that's the energy that goes into the streaming that is done. I will say there are some things that are really good. For example, on production sets, they used to use diesel generators. The bigger problem with that is when they're in neighborhoods, they're super loud, it smells, and they've moved away from that, which I'm sure neighborhoods appreciate. So that's a positive. And we just have to keep in mind that aside from the indoctrination that you see at universities, second to none is programming through content. And with that said, it's meant to make you feel guilty for every little thing that you do. And we're all aware of like product placement. Well, then there's also what I like to call product replacement. So, for example, you know, it was big and popular for sustainability groups to look at an episode and be like, does that guy in Texas on a ranch really have to drive a Ford? Can he drive a Tesla?
Really?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. However,
Before Elon Musk came out as a conservative.
he took the words out of my mouth. Because then it's also used as a punishment. And so then it was no longer Tesla, but Rivian. Rivian will be the new car to get.
They're going
Screen
bankrupt, by
time.
the way. It didn't work.
Well,
I can't imagine a rancher plugging a Tesla in to go and do his, go and do his driving around. Just can't.
and that's that chokehold that ends up being on storytellers, because they write this and then it gets changed and it loses its value, it loses its meaning. And that's why you have to be a powerhouse like Taylor Sheridan, where you can put the truth out there. And are we allowed to, I don't want to say a bad word, but he doesn't give a shit. And he doesn't have to. But in order to be able to have that voice, you have to be a Taylor Sheridan. Otherwise, what you put out there isn't the same. In regards to Megan, I know you're a huge fan.
Yeah.
Not as big as me.
Oh, same. Well, it's kind of like a car accident. You can't not look. I haven't watched that, but there's always other reasons for why certain shows get canceled and certain shows are given a lifeline. And all I can say to that is I will remind you of my ironclad NDA, is that there's if you look at Netflix and its programming, there's a lot of about the Obamas, right?
Mhm.
You have to be an educated viewer. You have to know what you're watching. So for like you, Hollywood, you're not a big fan, but you watch that show for giggles.
Yes.
But by doing so, you actually increase the ratings. Because remember, streaming doesn't have box office numbers. That's not how they can tell how big something is. It's by your viewership. So the number one way that you can fight back is by not watching.
Great. Well, maybe what I really want is a season 3 of Meghan Markle's show, because it's fantastic viewing for entertainment in a different way. Lois,
I actually got into huge trouble. I know you'll find this extraordinarily hard to believe, but with Channel 5, I was a regular panelist on their television show in the morning. It's a big show, the Jeremy Vine show. He also works for the BBC. Yeah, they used to let me on that as well. But I said that I felt that Prince Harry was a victim of quite classical domestic abuse. And she isolated him from his family. She told him that all of his values were wrong. She isolated him from his friends. She spoke for him. He lost his whole thing. I mean, he behaved appallingly towards his family, and the way that she ridiculed my late queen with that curtsy on that program. Anyway, I wasn't allowed on the show for ages. I mean, they forgave me eventually, but it made all of the national newspapers. So yeah, I don't think I'm Meghan's favorite person either. Yeah,
this relates to the World Prosperity Forum, because Harry was once prosperous and is no longer. And I believe they've both been attendees of the World Economic Forum in the past. So. But before we leave, and we may come back to Netflix again. I'm certainly going to have other questions, perhaps over an adult beverage later on. But I'm going to ask you a couple of questions. Well, this question: what percentage of Netflix employees are you aware that are not left wing? Not. Now, look, I phrased that specifically. Not conservatives at Netflix, not lefties.
Well, first I want to say, are you implying that Meghan has Harry's testicles in her purse? Yes, I think so.
I think there's something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. He's whipped.
Whipped.
It's actually, if you look up the definition of whipped in the dictionary, it's got Meghan's face and Harry's face next to it.
I'm an old school person, OG as they say, so I'm not very big on talking politics and religion at work. but I've also found that silence is violence. So even refraining from having comments, just little day-to-day things that I would say, I'm sure it led to the suspicion that I might have been that terrible C word. And it's the entertainment industry. So I'm sure it is dominated by not just liberals, but very lefty liberals. And if there were, and actually at Disney, surprisingly enough, I knew of a number of conservatives in higher up positions, too scared to ever say anything because there's always ramifications. At Netflix, I can't tell you that I ever met anybody else that didn't just have the same viewpoints in my own personal experience. Not one.
Okay. Not shocked. Maybe I shouldn't have opened with Netflix. I don't know. We already got into some that's pretty salty language, but that's great. I'll go back because I think culture is important. And in fact, a lot of Hollywood bigwig, muckety mucks come around here in Davos every year anyway. So they are coordinating the message into Hollywood, and they get some of that message here. Let me take it back a little broader here and get Adrian into this discussion. So, just overall, this has been, I think, a unique World Economic Forum and a wonderful World Prosperity Forum encountering it. But Howard Lutnick was interviewed on the main stage. I believe it was the main stage a day or two ago. And he said, globalism has failed. And he was challenged on that. And they tried to get him to talk about Greenland. He goes, no, I'm not going to talk about that. I'm going to keep talking about how globalism has failed. And they would not shut him up. That was pretty interesting. Larry Fink, who a couple of years ago, actually admitted, not at the conference in Davos, but at another WEF event, finally gave up the ghost and said, I don't know, it's 2 years ago, I think, Donnie, right? Said that we can't go wind and solar because the AI revolution is coming and that's never going to cut it. And we have to, stop lying to ourselves and be real about that. And then this week, he said that the global elites, meaning himself, have lost public trust and now face, quote, deep institutional mistrust. The world places far less trust in us. So I don't know how many World Economic Forums you may have been to. You may have been watching them from afar, as I have. But it strikes me, and you can correct me, that this may be remembered as a kind of turning point, hinge point kind of WEF conference in Davos, because those kind of statements were not only never said, they were never repeated over and over, and they would probably never invite you back. And Larry Fink, if he said this 5 years ago, would have been kicked off whatever board he's on in the WEF. So maybe you can speak to that. What do you think about those kind of statements that you're hearing these days?
Well, I think this thing is on, right? Without using a salty language, at least not yet. And by the way, I was trying to refrain to use that kind of language, still being in my diplomatic head. Speaking of the relation with European Union, I think this is just a reflection of everything else, what is going on, and obviously Poland has its own perspective. I think it should have started for Poland with something that some people didn't want to acknowledge when Russia attacked Ukraine in 2022 was the obvious breaking of the global order, and particularly from that perspective, living in New York City, seeing that from sort of a helicopter view was very stunning. How everyone acted on its own immediately after that situation happened, kind of giving an idea that the alliances are only good for the good times, and not as much worth for the times of crisis, where everyone is starting to thinking of what's their best interest is. And I think it will, well, we can argue with the globalism thesis whether it's gone or has never existed. Some people might say whether it's going to survive in a different form. But I think we are facing this change of language, which is now brutally honest, which is somehow also brought upon by the current American administration with the President Trump. in a slightly salty language, I would say, let's cut the crap and
Going to use me
well, I think it's sort of comes to my tongue itself somehow. I don't know, because that's what it really is, and it's actually that openness that we don't even know how to respond to, because the President Trump has a valid point pretty much on everything what he's saying. It's a different matter whether we agree with it or how our interests look and all of that in that perspective. But he's finally speaking about what really is the reality instead of what we try to wrap it up in. And this is a problem for elites because they always used more sophisticated language, which helped the mass not understand what is really going on, right? On that simple level of language. Now, when we simplify the message, it's really hard to hide the real aims, the real purposes of certain actions. And this is something that the elites have to face. That's why we're losing the trust, because we're starting to speak honestly with everything what's going on. And there is, I think, I mentioned that in my speech, that there is a lot of bottom-up movements amongst people, I think, across Europe and also globally. They are really fed up with being tricked and manipulated. These manipulations, especially in European Union, became so obvious that there is no equality, and these tags and frames of being more eco, being more sustainable don't apply equally to everyone. And this is what people are annoyed of. And I think they're starting to realize that they're not just single individuals. I'd say conservative people might be still a little afraid to speak up at Disney and other places. But then I think there is this entire movement of exposing practices, discriminations against conservatives, and we're only realizing that we actually have a power to speak up. So we kind of faded away from the globalism, but I think it's very much connected. I wouldn't like to think that this is an end of globalism. I don't think it's even possible to end the globalism to that extent that we all use the same tools, the internet, like everything is cross-connected. But I think we have a chance to take over at least a portion of it and redefine this into something that is more favorable to conservatives and to traditional values.
Very good. Did you identify yourself as among the elite? I thought I heard you say that. Because I might have to ask you to go if you did.
No, I'd say, look, I say, I don't understand why this term is somehow reserved for the elites that we understand and something that are superior to us, more intellectual people who graduated, at the fancy universities. I mean, and Poland, by the way, has a great example of it. When during the Second World War, most of the Polish elites were killed either by Soviets or by Nazis. And we found ourselves in the communist time. And even today, up until today, the biggest problem of the Polish society is that we don't have conservative elites, which are the elites,
Mm-hmm.
and kind of building this society in a right manner.
Was your aristocracy wiped out?
We're setting the ground. We're still setting the ground for the new elites. That yes, they are conservatives. We are conservatives, and we have equal right to speak up and being listened and to set the rules that will basically guide us to the future. Hopefully, better than the others are trying to impose.
Very good. Okay. Let me, this one would be for Lois, since she has the microphones.
Okay.
Ian McMillan, watching on our live stream today. Thanks, Ian,
Hello,
for being
Ian.
here. He's been here all week. He's been fantastic with a lot of great comments and questions. He asks, I wonder, can Brits avoid arrests for tweets in the UK by using a VPN and setting their country to somewhere else?
Quite possibly, but Keir Starmer, I can't bear describing him as our prime minister, but I'm going to have to. The prime minister has said that they want age for face recognition for social media to protect children. Not that he's given, a toss. Right now, I'm in the club of being naughty. Not that he has given, a monkeys about protecting children from people that come into this country and have a declaration for 12-year-old girls, but suddenly he cares about it when it's to do with social media, and the reason for that is so they know who everybody is, what everybody's saying. You won't be able to have even a semi-anonymous Twitter account anymore. What I will say is the fact that I haven't been arrested is actually one of life's great miracles. I have literally no idea how I am still walking the streets. So the answer to Ian's question, I had an uncle called Ian, actually, favorite uncle, is that I think whether you use that or not, they'll still track you down. But the main thing is not to try and avoid this legislation and this police state, but to actually just protest against it, highlight it, expose it for what it is. Just say no, no, no. We're not having it, basically. So yeah, that's my answer.
Some may have to say that from jail, but you should still say it, I guess.
Well, I'm very good friends, actually. I've become very good friends with Lucy Connolly. Now, Lucy Connolly was famously jailed for 31 months without bail around the time of what were described as the Farage riots. They were nothing to do with Nigel whatsoever, and they were actually after a guy. His parents were immigrants to this country. He was born in this country. I think he's of Somalian heritage originally, not that makes any difference whatsoever. Beheaded 3 little girls at a Taylor Swift dance class in the name of radical Islam. And Lucy, my friend, had recently lost her baby. She'd lost her baby due to actual medical negligence at the hands of the National Health Service. She did a tweet. She regretted it. She said something along the lines of, for all I care, these people burn the hotel down. She did not tell people to burn the hotels down. She went for a walk with her dog, come back, deleted the tweet and thought, oh, I shouldn't have put that and everything. She was arrested. She wasn't given bail, and she was in prison, as I say, for 31 months. We are in a very interesting situation at the moment. In fact, 3 individuals who were protesting recently for against an illegal immigrant, no problem in immigration, but when they're illegal, you don't know anything about them. That's the problem. He raped a 12-year-old girl. It's not funny actually at all, but it's just, you don't know whether to laugh or cry. He went to prison for less time than the 3 men who protested about it. So it's okay to rape little girls, but it's not okay to protest about it. We are in a very, very interesting time. But the British people, as I said in my talk, my speech earlier, we've had enough. We've had enough. And, that is reflected in the polls.
Yeah. Okay, 100%. And free speech is absolutely necessary to fight back against this stuff. And that's what this conference is about. While we can still speak it, we will speak it. All right. This comes from Ian Ian again. He had another question here. This is for you, Adrian. He says, how does the cost of electricity in Poland compare with other European countries, and why would that be? What would account for that difference?
Couldn't put it in a relevance to other countries, but it's significantly higher pretty much every month, and this is something that is very popularly criticized, and people don't understand it. Why is it happening? Frankly, probably one of the reasons is that we have one of the harshest winters in years. And thank you, European Union, because what's the reason of it? It's that we attached the cups to the bottles finally that helped.
Oh, jeez.
So we see, and it's been for quite a bit of time, so that you can clearly see how it works, helping the environment. So yes, so the regulation sometimes works. I'm just trying to say, try to balance. But the reality is that obviously we don't have solutions. We're shutting down our mines and all the mines across Europe. while we have to realize that coal will still remain one of the major sources for the energy for Europe. We obviously had to face the brutal reality that we have to cut supplies from Russia, which was very painful and expensive, but at the same time we see really minimum or nothing done in terms of becoming the independent in that matter. And Poland is actually, since 2023, when the Polish government, Poland was ruled by a conservative government, we really didn't give that much to be compliant to what European Union is trying to impose on us. In that matter, we were trying to be as independent as possible, pushing the envelope. But nowadays, it's not the case anymore, and this cost Polish society literally very much. But you know what? I think that this is one of the triggers too. So I don't want to say that we should perceive it as something positive. It's never positive, but it will help people realize where we're actually going and what is this problem with European regulations and European approach, particularly to the new Europe and new European Union countries, really is. So as much as it's bad now, I hope it will be helpful for the future elections across Europe.
James wants to speak to that.
All right, so Poland, as some of our research, I mentioned that we are in the process of compiling the data for and then publishing affordable, reliable, clean energy scorecard for various nations. Poland is one of those we're looking at. And if you recall, as I documented how there was a substantial shift from 2020 through 2024 in the United States away from coal power, and how that shift was counterbalanced, so to speak, by an equal, even a little bit more shift toward wind and solar. Again, not driven by economics, but for political reasons. And we saw how the prices had been flat for a decade, then they rose over 20% in 5 years. The same situation and the same data and the same reasons apply in Poland. So look at the numbers. Poland has tremendous coal reserves, as does the United States. Poland historically has had much lower electricity prices than other European nations. They still do have lower electricity prices, but they are higher than the United States. They're getting higher all the time. And as part of this investigation research we've done, just a point, globally, 14% of electricity is generated from wind and solar, but the vast majority of nations are well below that. It's the European Union nations where you have wind and solar generation. I believe the number is 24%. And some nations like the UK, I believe, is at 40% or close to it. Somewhere in the 30s or up to 40. How embarrassing. And here's the thing. So what we do is we took a look at the nations with the highest percentage of wind and solar production for electricity generation. I believe there were 13 that were 33% or higher. They were predominantly in the European Union. Of those 13, there are 200. I mean, some of the countries, official countries, are debatable, but utilizing the data that we're utilizing of the listing of 212 countries in the world, every single one of those 13 with the high wind and solar, which we are told is so economical, already less expensive than conventional energy, every single one of those was within the top 31 countries in the world as far as expensive electricity. There was not one that was even middle of the pack. There was not one that was even in the second quartile to the middle of the pack. So the proof is in the pudding. Poland, unfortunately, is getting dragged along that path. When I've had meetings with top Polish officials in the past, and we've talked about it, they know it and they lament it. But what they tell me is it's not even the Polish people or government's willful doing. It's needing to bow down to the European Union and their net zero mandates, or at least a path to net zero, or the European Union will crush them like a bug.
Right, and won't be eating the bugs, by the way. Yeah, in fact, speaking of that, it was just to bring up something funny. So Scott Bessent has been here all week. He's a Treasury Secretary of the United States. He had an interview, and it says, he said, a few years ago, when it was, you're not going to own anything, you're going to eat insects, it was just the inmates running the asylum at that point, speaking of the WEF. His interviewer said, "You're not into the bugs?" Besant, "After a few days of Swiss German food, I may switch to bugs." Which is very mean and not true. I was at a restaurant last night. It was very good food here.
I'd just like to say I haven't had a bad meal since I got here. It's been absolutely delightful, the food. But anyway, I digress.
Right.
Yeah.
It was just, I digressed as well. It was just a joke. Actually, I want to go back to Danielle and talk a little bit more about, messaging and, again, because it's Netflix is global. I mean, if I have a VPN at home, I guess we didn't get a straight answer on whether somebody could use a VPN for the United States and tweet and not be in trouble. We're going to get back to that in a minute. But Netflix is global. I mean, it's people watch it all over the world. It's why its valuation is so high. So the messaging really matters. And you brought up a couple projects that were pitched, and it's like, no, that doesn't adhere to our values, I think is what you were told, right? That the Netflix people, or wherever you were, but they were like, no, that doesn't align with our values, so we're not going to go with that production, for instance.
Well, it wasn't just that. It's also that I think what most people don't understand is it's not like when you say Netflix, it's everybody at Netflix, or even at the top people at Netflix. No, it's that, unfortunately, like everything, when you give certain people power, they rule absolutely. So, whether or not, I mean, and this is just how I felt, I don't even think that it was really looked at. It was just because I wasn't part of this very small internal group that gets to say yes or no.
Mm-hmm.
And how does that internal group get there? Is because somebody puts them in power with their incredible education and their belief system. So, and then they get away with it. They get away with doing what it is that they believe.
Right.
And then people are afraid to say anything. So, I mean, what could be bad about children's books about wolves and nature and using them as a teaching tool? There's really nothing there, but there's also a lot of hierarchy in there. And so there's a lot of complexities as to why. So, no farmers, no food. What could be wrong with that? There's other things on Netflix that you can watch. I just would prefer to watch a documentary that doesn't tell you how you're supposed to think and feel, but present facts and let you, as the educated viewer, come up with your own answer, how you feel about it. And that's not allowed. And when I, like everybody else, realized the indoctrination of our universities, having a daughter that graduated from UC Santa Cruz, and the difference between when she went into school and when she came out, I mean, not to be, I don't know, not hopeful, but I think we kind of lost the war on the universities. That was a long game plan. But the content we can control. And that is the next thing that gets into college dorms. It gets into your high schools. It gets into grade schools. So having options in content is really important, which is why I took it upon myself to try to bring that. I think flyover states are made fun of. Their content's not there. They don't like watching television shows with 7-year-olds twerking as some sort of entertainment. And unfortunately, as a parent, you now have to watch the content that you put in front of your children. Gone are the days where you can let, any particular program sit there and babysit your kids for you, which may be a good thing. But you have to be very careful, because we all know that children are impressionable. And as mother wolves, it is our responsibility to make sure what they watch. But it's getting really hard to find it, because the innuendo is in everything. It's in everything.
Yeah. Well, I mean, what made me think of this, along with that, good point, was the ideological conformity of the people that make the decisions at Netflix. For instance, I'm sure I could find 100, maybe 200 documentaries on the, climate alarmist documentaries produced by Leo DiCaprio and or whoever. In fact, some of the fiction, Don't Look Up was another ridiculous climate apocalyptic fiction that was terrible. It was not art. It was terrible. But I bring this up because the Heartland Institute, we are known globally as the leading think tank that pushes back on climate alarmism, have been for many years. We have screened several films made by very good filmmakers, giving an alternate perspective to the alarmist view that you see on every streaming service. Many years ago, our friends Philip McAleer and Anne McElhenney had screened a film about climate. Basically, they entered the film kind of on the side of, at least passively, like, certainly there's a problem here, and ended up through their research and their making of the film to come around to the other side and realize this is a lot of hype. And I remember distinctly the opening scene of the film was they were filming children in Britain, little girl crying because all the polar bears were dying. And then they do the research and realize polar bear population is increasing. So this is, why are we lying to our kids like this? Why are we traumatizing them? That's a pretty compelling story in a documentary. Our friend Mark Morano at CFECT has a good film called Climate Hustle. It lays out the facts on how the climate hustle really had started and where it was at the time. I don't know, that was probably 6 years ago when that came out. And then again, the third movie I think of is Climate the Movie, which gets it right to it. And it really presents in a very compelling way the facts about what's happening to the climate instead of the alarmism. And after each one of those screenings, the people that saw it with us in those venues, plus of course the producers of those films, said, we really need to get this on a streaming service. Just having this on DVD isn't going to do it. And you guys can help us get it on Netflix, right? I'm like, nope, we cannot, because we do not have that power. But there's that frustration that there is, and there's a whole market not being served. But when there's an ideological litmus test, and guardians at the gate that only think in one way, you're never going to get it seen that way, and that's a shame.
And I'll add, if I can, the movie A Climate Conversation.
Another one, yeah.
Recently filmed by some of our friends, a fantastic film. And if my understanding is correct, I believe it was Newsmax. I hope it was, if I'm going to say it and give them the credit, but I think it was Newsmax that has shown that movie several times, and especially on their streaming service. And it's been very popular, but I doubt if any in the mainstream media would have picked it up. Climate Hustle, they had an evening when they released it, their debut. They had to rent out movie theaters, the second, third-rate ones, because, it's not Hollywood, and it was the highest watched movie in the nation in movie theaters when it was showing. That was fantastic. And then I contrast that to, I recall back in, it was either 2013 or 2014. Showtime produced a series. It was called Years of Living Dangerously, and it was maybe a dozen or so episodes, an hour long apiece, documenting as best as they could the climate crisis and how horrible it is. And at the very end, they had an episode in which they wanted to investigate and out who they thought was the person or entity most responsible for thwarting what needs to be done to protect the climate. And they decided it was James Taylor and the Heartland Institute. So it took them a little persuasion, but they followed me around for a year. They were filming me testifying in state legislatures, playing poker at the World Series of Poker, all those fun things, hiking outdoors in the wilderness. They were like, wait a second, you're not an environmentalist. Yeah, I am. I just don't believe in this stupid climate crisis. But anyway, it was funny. 13 episodes, 12 episodes, whatever. I got to be featured in one of them, and gosh darn it, I hear that heads were rolling, because that's what people remembered, because I presented that counter argument that stuck with people.
Sure, please.
And that's the point, is what you said, Hollywood, is that these writers get frustrated because they come up with quality work. And one of the things that all ties in together is these students go to university, they get placed in positions sort of like HR. And then if you're paying attention, you start to see how the dynamics of an organization changes, and it becomes a very large echo chamber. And so for myself, because I've been asked before, for those that know, I have conservative leanings. And like most people, I didn't start out that way. The Democratic Party lost me a long time ago, and it's not what it was supposed to be. And if you care about children and family, conservative is the only box you can check, in my opinion. But with that said, not only are you in an echo chamber, it is really hard when you're the one person of dissent, the devil's advocate, so to speak, because you risk things still. So as this fine gentleman over here said, it's still not particularly safe to speak up. But when people that know me and know me personally are like, how can you work for the studios? It's because that's where we need to be. Because without people that have a different opinion, it is an echo chamber and they all agree with each other, right? It's all yes people. So if we don't put ourselves in uncomfortable positions and hope that we can effectuate some sort of change and go out there like I did, trying on my own time to go and bring in additional content, there needs to be pressure from the consumer. Elon Musk had a big canceling of Netflix after they put out all of that content that they did in regards to their children programming. And, you know, how successful was that? I don't know. I'm sure people canceled it yesterday, but then, you know, that Meghan Markle was back on, so they had to resubscribe. It's the consumers. Consumers have power, but it has to be together, and you have to be able to give up something, right? So even my oldest daughter, who didn't go to university, went to trade school, so she's always leaned more conservatively. Do I really have to unsubscribe from Netflix? But Stranger Things, the ending is coming on.
Yeah.
It has to hurt a little bit. You have to be willing to have it hurt a little bit if you want your voice to be heard, because there is power in the people and there is power in consumerism. That's the point of free markets.
Absolutely. Can I just add, talking about, just feeding into what you were just saying about, I found out an hour ago that my accountant has decided that I am a politically exposed person and they can no longer represent me.
Wow.
So I've got a tax return that needs to be going in the next couple of weeks. I don't know whether that's going to go in. I don't know how quickly I'll be able to get a new accountant. But like you were saying, you do have to be brave. And not everybody is. Apparently, they did a risk assessment on me. But I don't think I've ever had a risk assessment done on me. Actually, that's probably not true. But actually, that is definitely not true. But yeah, so I now no longer have an accountant, and yeah. So, but again, the leader of the Reform Party had a similar situation a couple of months ago. An accountant he'd had for a very long time. He was debanked first, quite famously, by Coutts Bank about 18 months ago, and then he was accountanted. That's a new thing a couple of months ago. But yeah, so as I say, just feeding into what you're saying about, you have to be a little bit brave, don't you, to have different views or to be in the political arena at all. Yeah.
Okay. Very good. Well, and speaking of brave, actually, we have a question here from Jay Wester, 7009 is his handle on YouTube. He says, are we going to see, and this would be brave, are we going to see countries breaking away from the EU and becoming independent again? Is that
that
possible?
already happened
Yes.
in England, in the UK.
There's been one, yes.
Yeah.
But do you think it's possible? I'll ask you, Adrian. That I've asked others that come. We've had a lot of friends from Eastern Europe who seem to have a lot less patience for I'll say it, the bullshit of the elites, mostly from Western Europe, that kind of run the show at the WEF. Do you think it seems impossible? Trump's election seemed impossible once upon a time. Does it seem possible that the project of the European Union could break apart because of really the way certain factions in the EU have abused their power against others?
I got to tell you, this is my favorite question because it has this gravity, right? I don't think we're there yet, that the countries like Poland would like to withdraw themselves from European Union. And I still think and believe that there is a sense in fighting this battle of bringing European Union to the course that it has been originally created upon, because it's been, like, we forgot about it, but it's been created on a very conservative principles as the Europe of nations. And also, if I should be optimistic, maybe too optimistic, if we hang on for a little bit, seeing what's happening eastwards from Poland, maybe we can actually survive as a new sort of center or new power for Europe. But it might be also a wishful thinking. I think if Poland is ever going to leave European Union, perhaps other countries as well, it would have to be a consequence of making the fix of European Union impossible. But also, I think it will not leave an empty place. I think in the global world, whether we like the term globalism or not, we need alliances. And I think, there are initiatives, and I would never say that they're meant to replace European Union. But let's talk about Three Seas initiative, particularly for the Eastern and Central European countries. That should create a sort of a counterweight for the old Europe. So perhaps something new will come out of it. I don't know who has a copyright to the term European Union, but I think it's not a matter of this existing organization. We know that this existing organization as it is has to either collapse or change dramatically, come back to the original path. Otherwise, it will not make sense to pursue it. It will be too weak. Actually, I don't even think it's a question of existing or surviving. I think it will just get conquered by either the known enemies or the enemies that are not known yet. Maybe as an implosion, even as you see the migration crisis have changed the landscape of most of the Western European countries. Likely not Poland yet, but we see what will happen. So there is not an easy answer, and I'm not a politician. I wouldn't say yes, let's vote for Pole exit or however you want to call it. I still believe that there is a work to do, and with the good alliances and that waking up of conservative movement, we have a chance to actually redefine European Union before we decide to exit it.
James wanted to weigh in over there.
It calls to mind back when I was in law school. Boy, it seems like forever ago. We had in class, one of the discussions was, okay, we have a constitutional document that limits the power of the federal government, at least in theory. And so what happens when the federal government wants to impose its will on the states in an area that is the state's domain? And the solution largely becomes, okay, let's trap the bird in the gilded cage. So, for example, when we had forever the 55-mile-per-hour speed limits, that's a type of example where you can say, okay, if you do what we like you to do, even though we don't have the authority to impose these restrictions, but if you impose them, we're going to give you all this money. And you're a state legislator is looking to have all the money so that you can show you spent money for your constituents. And now all of a sudden you get it, you're trapped. It's like the drug dealer. You give the first hit or two for free and then you're trapped. And I've been speaking with folks, with many of my friends. We work with quite a few policymakers and thought leaders in government in Europe. And Adrian can tell me if what I'm hearing from others, if he feels differently. But what I hear from our folks there is there would be tremendous support for leaving the EU in Central Europe, Eastern European nations, except that they are the bird trapped in the golden cage. There would be too many economic consequences for doing so. The UK was large enough. I mean, basically, you've got Germany and France dictating what's happening. And when I say Germany and France, what I mean is the leftist globalists who are running the political show there. The UK was not at a position where they had to bow down to Germany and France because the UK was strong enough in and of itself that it didn't require the free crack and then the continued cocaine money to keep going. So that's what I hear from folks. Let me know if your thoughts are different, but you can get trapped in that.
Just something I wanted to add. Similarly to the UK, for instance, Poland doesn't have a European currency, something that we smartly avoided over time. So in all of these cases, probably the situation will be a little different in terms of being trapped in this golden cage. We're receiving subsidies for European Union. Is European Union weaponized these subsidies and the money that flows to the countries? Of course, we've seen it before the 2023 elections in Poland, and we're going to see that. We are seeing that before the elections that are coming up in Hungary, maybe in other places as well. But again, I think we're also contributing financially to the European Union. So I think it's a little bit more balanced, and I think the situation will very much be predominated by being the members of the Eurozone on top of being the members of European Union itself.
Very good. Okay, we have time for a few more questions here. This is one from one of our viewers. I'm actually very curious about it as well. How much at risk are Americans when visiting the UK if they had said conservative things on social media that would be controversial, such as like J.K. Rowling challenging the transgender agenda? This is from Stan Goldenberg. I would add to that, I've seen clips of it, of British citizens opening their doors and the police are there because you posted something on Facebook that somebody found offensive, so you must come with us. Is there any risk out of Americans traveling to the UK if they actually engage in free speech that we have, and they walk into a country that, like yours, that no longer seems to have it?
I think Keir Starmer, who I'm not sure if you're aware or not, but was the former head of the Crown Prosecution Service. So he was actually making the decisions about which people were prosecuted. He made a decision not to prosecute one of the most extraordinary in terms of the scope and number of victims, a BBC presenter called Jimmy Savile. It was actually Keir Starmer who made the decision that there wasn't sufficient evidence. I would say with the president that you've currently got in the White House, they would be averse to doing anything to American citizens who are visiting us, British subjects, in the UK. I don't think the answer to your question is I think you're probably all right. Yeah, I think if you've seen the footage of Keir Starmer with President Trump, it's actually embarrassing how sycophantic he is towards him and slavish. Although obviously what he's doing in the background doesn't match that up. But no, I'd say you guys with Trump watching your backs, I'd say you guys are pretty safe in the UK for now.
I wouldn't exactly hire you for the British tourism board when your slogan is basically "Come on over from America. You probably won't be arrested."
look. All I can say to you is it's in hand. We're going to sort it out. This guy's not going to be in government for very much longer. Well, not if I've got anything to do with it. Anyway.
Very good. Very good. Okay, this is another one here for Adrian. This comes from La Raza for Trump 130. That's the all right.
What are our political affiliations?
Yeah, well, that's basically Latinos for Trump is what I think that's how that. So you might know. Well, that's a good question. So this is for you, Adrian. This person says the only reason, in my opinion, the only reason they are giving Poland any slack is because they expect it to be used. They expect it to be used to antagonize Russia and take the hit should a larger war begin. Do you agree with that?
Well, I would have to understand it first, the logic behind it. Can we read it again?
I'll read it again. I'm not sure I understand it. And if we can't really pick it out, we'll just move on. But he says the only reason I guess maybe WF or UN or whatever, the only reason they are giving Poland any slack is because they expect it to be used to antagonize Russia and take the hit should a larger war begin.
So the only
Well, it kind of-
the EU
no,
allows
no, I'm-
Poland to defy them a little bit is so they
I-
can use them in the war.
It's pretty obvious. I would say and it's not even anything that would have to rely on anybody's intentions. We're just there. We're so basically there is no other way of the land invasion of Europe sort of bypassing the territory of Poland. And I also mentioned that in my speech that it's nothing new either in the Polish history. So many years of the invasions of Russia in different forms and name tags. It always has been between I should say, the Ribbentrop-Molotov Pact comes to mind. Nord Stream more recently, right? 1 and 2. For Poland, it's obvious that the threat, even though we are committed and associated within the European structures and the Western, as we understand it, as a community of countries, we perceive the threat that goes sort of both ways. And yes, we are a shield for Europe. This is what we came to realization. That's why we're also that much vocal, and that's why Polish President Nawrocki, newly elected, thank God we saved actually the elections of the Polish president. We elected the conservative president that doesn't really care that much of the complaints of the European Union leaders and structures, while he's actually tightening the bonds with the United States of America, because the irony of our situation is that we definitely can more rely on the support of our American allies than we can on our European allies. And one part of the story is that obviously Germany does not have any capabilities, military capabilities to defend Poland, but also we would like to say that we're very skeptical, thinking that they will be very much eager to jump, in and help in case of the Russian invasion. So yes, this is a historically proved, this is absolutely true. The one part that I disagree with is this antagonization with Russia. I don't think Poland is being used in any sort of proxy. I think our stance is pretty clear, and I understand that many conservatives, Republicans in America don't get it. Why is it so? But Poland has this experience with Russia. It's not something that we perceive as we're being tricked, like they try to antagonize Poland and Russians. We just know that we are a natural enemies of not Russia as a nation, not Russia as a society, but Russia as a imperialist thought that is being persuaded by the Russian leaders, including Mr. Putin, who's right now in the office.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we're almost done. I want to finish on a lighter note than that. Good grief. And so I'm going to go to Danielle again. We'll end with Netflix like we started with Netflix. Now, the Obamas, when they left office, they just walked into, at least I think of reports vary, $50 million deal. I've seen $100 million deal. I've seen higher than that attached to their names. And so they were hired, I suppose, by Netflix to produce content for the streaming service, and they have a handful of movies, I believe, or they're put down as producer credits. How are the Obamas doing in streaming numbers on Netflix? Are they very popular, or are they down near the bottom?
Well, I'm not even sure. I know they did a nature thing.
You'd have to
yes.
tell me because I have no interest in it. So go ahead.
Well, that's just it. I'm very specific as to what I watch. So I do know that they have a platform through Netflix. I know that they've produced through Netflix. But I, like you, Hollywood, have not been interested. So I actually don't quite know.
You don't know the numbers of that?
I do not.
I think you do know the numbers. All right, tell you what. Blink twice if they're low, and blink once if they're high.
I feel like I'm Leo in The Revenant.
Yeah.
Don't blink.
That's right. I'll fix it in post. It'll be fine. All right. That'll do it for today, actually, and for our whole entire week here in Zurich, Switzerland, for the World Prosperity Forum, the counter programming that I think we might make a regular thing here to counter the World Economic Forum. I want to thank everybody who has spoken at this event with us this week, not just the people here today, but we were here Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. We had speakers from all over Europe. We will probably try to get even more international next year. Of course, Heartland Institute staff has been here all week, working very long in hours to not just make this technically possible, but also provide some of the commentary that you've seen today. Keely Drukala has done a lot of with the camera work and the audio behind the scenes. Donald Kendall, Linnea Lucan offering their expertise on several panels. Of course, our Heartland Institute President James Taylor is here as well, and myself, Jim Lakely, and also Andy Singer behind the scenes back in Chicagoland, also producing in the back end. But I also want to thank not just the viewers, but also the supporters of the Heartland Institute that makes wonderful events like this possible. We put this together in 6 weeks. This is normally the kind of event that it would take at least 4 months to correctly plan. And again, Keely Drukala was able to bring that together. And it's a miracle. It's amazing. But none of this stuff is possible without the support of the people who donate to us. We're a nonprofit 501c3 organization based in the United States. You can donate to help support programming like this. You can help the fight for freedom in the United States and now increasingly abroad by donating to Heartland, and that's heartland.org. There's a donate button there. And if you want to reduce your tax burden, that's a great way to do it because it's tax-free in that regard. Again, my name is Jim Lakely. I'm Executive Vice President of the Heartland Institute. I want to thank everybody again for being here with us, and we will maybe see you again next year. Bye-bye.